Power lines cut, utilities disconnected, buildings officially abandoned for decades. Yet across the world, in castles and mansions that should be completely dark, lights still burn in empty windows. From the Hudson River to the Belgian countryside, from Nashville's music scene to Italy's plague islands, there are estates where something impossible is happening. This isn't about ghost stories or supernatural phenomena. This is about discovery, uncovering the real reasons why buildings refuse to die, why electrical systems outlast the people who built them, and what happens when human ambition creates machines that won't accept abandonment. The phantom power of Poveglia Island, Italy. In the heart of the Venetian lagoon, where the waters catch the last glimmers of twilight, stands a solitary bell tower. Its ancient stone rises from a small island that maps don't advertise to tourists, casting a shadow that has watched over these waters for nearly 9 centuries. But what draws the eye of passing fishermen isn't the tower's medieval architecture or its crumbling masonry. It's the light that shouldn't be there. Poveglia Island sits abandoned, officially uninhabited since 1968, yet navigation lights continue to pulse from its structures. The old psychiatric hospital buildings, their windows long since shattered, still receive electrical current through systems that no living person maintains. Local boat captains speak in hushed tones about the glow they've witnessed emanating from buildings that should be dark, about electrical systems that refuse to die even after decades of neglect. The island spans just 7 hectares, barely larger than a city block, but its infrastructure tells a different story. Power lines still snake beneath the overgrown vegetation, connecting to a grid that somehow maintains itself. The lighthouse function of the ancient bell tower continues to operate, its beacon sweeping across the lagoon waters as it has for generations, though no lighthouse keeper has set foot on the island in over 50 years. This mystery deepens when you understand what Poveglia was built to be. In the 12th century, this small patch of land served as a thriving community, complete with homes, churches, and the towering bell structure that still dominates the skyline today. The bell tower belonged to the Church of San Vitale, a sacred space where families gathered for centuries until the Black Death changed everything. When the bubonic plague struck Venice in 1348, city officials needed somewhere to quarantine the sick and dying. Poveglia's isolated location made it perfect for this grim purpose. The island transformed from a peaceful community into a quarantine station, where ships carrying plague victims would dock. Those who arrived sick rarely left alive. The original residents fled, leaving behind their homes, their church, and their lives. For over 4 centuries, Poveglia served as Venice's primary quarantine facility. Every outbreak of plague, cholera, or yellow fever meant more ships arriving at its shores. The island's soil became a mixture of earth and human ash, as bodies were burned in massive pyres that burned day and night during the worst outbreaks. Historical records suggest that over 160,000 people met their end on this small island, their remains becoming part of the very ground itself. In 1922, the Italian government decided to repurpose the island once again. The old quarantine buildings were converted into a psychiatric hospital, a place where those deemed mentally ill were sent for treatment. The transformation required extensive electrical work, modern plumbing and communication systems that connected the island to the mainland. Generators were installed, power lines were laid, and for the first time in centuries, Poveglia was fully electrified. The psychiatric facility operated until 1968, housing patients in buildings that had once sheltered plague victims. Medical staff lived on the island, maintaining the electrical systems and ensuring that power flowed to every ward, every treatment room, and every administrative office. The infrastructure was built to last, with backup systems and redundant power sources that could keep the facility operational even during storms that regularly swept across the lagoon. But then came the closure. In 1968, changes in mental health treatment and budget constraints led to the hospital's abandonment. Staff packed their belongings and left on the last boat, expecting the island to fall into darkness. The Italian government cut official power connections and removed most equipment of value. Poveglia was officially abandoned, left to the elements and the passage of time. Yet the lights never went out completely. Local fishermen began reporting strange illumination from the island within months of the closure. Coast Guard patrols noted that the lighthouse function of the bell tower continued to operate, its lights still visible to ships navigating the lagoon at night. Electrical engineers were consulted, but their explanations fell short of the reality unfolding on Poveglia. The mystery deepened with each passing year. Urban explorers who managed to reach the island documented functioning electrical outlets in abandoned buildings, ventilation systems that still hummed with power, and lighting fixtures that flickered to life when switches were tested. The island seemed to maintain its own electrical heartbeat, independent of any external power source. Investigation into this phenomenon revealed several possibilities. During its time as a psychiatric hospital, Poveglia had been equipped with its own power generation capabilities, including backup systems designed to maintain critical functions during emergencies. Some of these systems were built into the island's infrastructure so thoroughly that they became nearly impossible to fully deactivate. The bell tower, converted centuries ago to serve navigational purposes, had been connected to marine safety systems that operated independently of the hospital's power grid. These systems were designed with redundancies and automatic maintenance protocols that could function for decades without human intervention. The Italian Coast Guard confirmed that certain navigational aids in the lagoon are maintained through automated systems, though they wouldn't specify which islands benefit from this technology. Underground cable systems installed during the hospital's construction included geothermal and tidal power collection methods, experimental for their time but surprisingly durable. These systems were meant to supplement the island's power needs during its operational years, but they continued to function long after the main generators were shut down. Marine engineers who studied the island's infrastructure found evidence of tidal generators installed along the shoreline, devices that captured the energy of the lagoon's daily tidal movements. These generators were camouflaged within the island's seawalls and designed to provide emergency power to critical systems. The constant movement of Adriatic tides has kept these generators turning for over 50 years. Today, Poveglia remains officially abandoned and largely inaccessible to the public. The Italian government controls access to the island, citing safety concerns and historical preservation. However, maritime records show that navigation aids connected to the island continue to receive maintenance through automated systems managed by Venice's Port Authority. The electrical systems that still function on Poveglia represent a fascinating intersection of historical infrastructure and modern engineering. What began as a medieval community's basic power needs evolved through centuries of adaptation, ultimately creating a network so robust that it continues to operate independently. The island serves as an unintentional experiment in sustainable power generation, its systems having achieved a form of technological immortality that their original designers never intended. Recent satellite imagery shows lights in several of the island's buildings during evening hours, suggesting that power flow remains consistent across multiple structures. Environmental monitoring equipment installed by marine biologists studying lagoon ecology continues to draw power from the island's grid, indicating that the electrical systems maintain sufficient capacity for modern electronic devices. Lee Plaza's Eternal Vigil, Detroit, USA. Some men build monuments to themselves without ever intending to. They create structures meant to showcase their success, their vision, their place in the world. But sometimes these monuments outlive their creators in ways that tell stories far different from what was originally planned. In the heart of Detroit, 17 stories of Art Deco elegance rise from West Grand Boulevard, and even now, decades after its abandonment, lights continue to flicker in windows that should be dark. This is the story of Ralph T. Lee, a man who arrived in Detroit with nothing and built an empire of stone and steel, only to watch it crumble in ways he never could have imagined. But perhaps the most remarkable part of his story isn't how his greatest creation fell, but how it refuses to stay down. Ralph Thomas Lee didn't start life expecting to reshape Detroit's skyline. Born in the late 1800s to working-class parents, he knew the value of hard work from an early age. His first job in Detroit paid him $1.50 a day at a local furniture store, where he spent long hours learning the basics of business, customer service, and the importance of quality craftsmanship. But Lee had bigger dreams than selling furniture to Detroit's growing population. The young man possessed something that separated him from his fellow workers, an eye for opportunity and an understanding of what people truly wanted. Detroit in the early 1900s was transforming from a small industrial city into the automotive capital of the world. Henry Ford's assembly lines were drawing thousands of workers from across the country, and these new residents needed places to live. Lee saw this need before most others did. By the 1910s, Lee had transitioned from selling furniture to selling the dream of home ownership. He started small, purchasing modest lots and constructing simple apartment buildings for factory workers. But unlike many developers who built cheap housing to maximize profits, Lee focused on quality and comfort. He understood that even working-class families wanted to live with dignity, and his buildings reflected that philosophy. His reputation grew along with his bank account. Each successful project led to larger opportunities, and Lee began acquiring prime real estate throughout Detroit. He developed an eye for locations that would become valuable as the city expanded, purchasing land in areas that others considered too far from the city centre. When Detroit's growth reached these neighbourhoods, Lee was already there, ready with the perfect building for the perfect moment. By the 1920s, Ralph T. Lee had become one of Detroit's most successful real estate developers. His portfolio included over 30 buildings throughout the city, ranging from modest apartment complexes to luxury residential hotels. He employed hundreds of workers, from construction crews to building managers, and his developments housed thousands of Detroit residents. Local newspapers regularly featured stories about his latest projects, and city officials sought his input on urban development plans. But Lee's greatest ambition was still ahead of him. As Detroit's population swelled past 1 million residents, he envisioned a building that would rival anything in New York or Chicago. He wanted to create a residential hotel that would attract the city's wealthiest residents, a place where automotive executives, successful merchants, and prominent professionals would choose to live. This building would be his masterpiece, his lasting contribution to Detroit's architectural legacy. In 1927, Lee found the perfect location on West Grand Boulevard, just west of the emerging New Center district where General Motors was building its headquarters. The area was becoming Detroit's answer to Manhattan's Upper East Side, attracting residents who wanted luxury living with easy access to downtown. Lee purchased the land and hired Charles Noble, one of Detroit's most respected residential architects, to design a building unlike anything the city had ever seen. The Lee Plaza Hotel, as it came to be known, represented the pinnacle of 1920s luxury and sophistication. Noble designed a 17-story Art Deco masterpiece with a distinctive red tile roof that could be seen from miles away. The building featured 220 residential units, each designed with the latest conveniences including private bathrooms, modern kitchens, and central heating. The lobby was finished with imported marble, crystal chandeliers, and hand-carved wooden panels that created an atmosphere of European elegance. But the Lee Plaza was more than just an apartment building. It was designed as a residential hotel, offering the services of a luxury resort to long-term residents. The building included a full-service restaurant, a beauty salon, a barbershop, and a roof garden where residents could socialize while enjoying panoramic views of the city. Valet parking, daily maid service, and 24-hour concierge assistance were standard amenities. The building even had its own power plant and electrical systems, designed to ensure that residents would never experience interruptions in service. When the Lee Plaza opened in 1928, it immediately became Detroit's most prestigious address. Automotive executives moved into the building's largest suites, bringing their families to enjoy the luxury and convenience that Lee had envisioned. The restaurant became a gathering place for the city's business elite, and the roof garden hosted parties that were covered in society pages across the Midwest. Ralph T. Lee had achieved his dream of creating Detroit's premier residential address. The building's electrical systems were particularly advanced for their time. Lee had insisted on redundant power sources, including the building's own generators and connections to multiple city power grids. The idea was that Lee Plaza residents would never experience the electrical outages that occasionally affected other parts of the city. Elevators, lighting, heating, and all the building's luxury amenities were designed to operate continuously, maintaining the high standard of living that residents expected. For a brief moment, Ralph T. Lee stood at the top of Detroit's real estate world. His personal fortune was estimated at over $6 million, an enormous sum in the 1920s. The Lee Plaza was fully occupied with a waiting list of potential residents eager to experience the luxury lifestyle it offered. Lee had proven that Detroit could compete with New York and Chicago in offering sophisticated urban living, and his success inspired other developers to attempt similar projects. But even as the Lee Plaza celebrated its first anniversary, storm clouds were gathering on the economic horizon. The stock market crash of October 1929 sent shockwaves through every American city, but Detroit felt the impact particularly severely. The automotive industry, which had fueled the city's incredible growth, suddenly found itself with far more production capacity than it could sell. Factories closed, workers were laid off, and the steady stream of new residents that had supported Detroit's real estate boom suddenly dried up. Ralph T. Lee watched his empire begin to crumble almost overnight. The wealthy executives and professionals who had filled the Lee Plaza's luxury suites found themselves unemployed or struggling to maintain their previous lifestyle. Residents began moving out, seeking more affordable housing as the Great Depression deepened. The building's restaurant closed when too few residents could afford to dine there regularly, and many of the luxury services that had defined the Lee Plaza experience were discontinued. By 1930, just 2 years after its grand opening, the Lee Plaza was struggling to maintain occupancy. Lee had borrowed heavily to finance the building's construction, and the mortgage payments became increasingly difficult to meet as rental income declined. He was forced to sell the building to the Detroit Investment Company, but even the new owners couldn't reverse the building's fortunes. The Great Depression had fundamentally changed Detroit's economy, and there was no longer a market for the type of luxury living that the Lee Plaza represented. The Detroit Investment Company tried various strategies to keep the building profitable. They converted some of the larger suites into smaller apartments, hoping to attract middle-class residents who couldn't afford the original luxury units. They reduced services and eliminated many of the amenities that had made the building special. But these changes only accelerated the departure of remaining residents, as the Lee Plaza lost the distinctive character that had justified its premium prices. Ralph T. Lee's personal finances collapsed along with his flagship building. The man who had once been worth $6 million found himself facing bankruptcy, his vast real estate portfolio worthless in the new economic reality. The other buildings he had developed throughout Detroit faced similar challenges, as residents moved away from the city or could no longer afford market-rate rents. By 1935, Lee had lost virtually everything he'd built over 2 decades of work. The Lee Plaza itself entered a long, slow decline that would last for decades. During World War II, the building found new life as housing for defense workers drawn to Detroit's factories, but this was a far cry from its original luxury mission. In the 1950s and 1960s, as Detroit's middle class began moving to the suburbs, the building struggled to maintain occupancy. The grand lobby was subdivided, the luxury amenities were removed, and the building gradually transformed from a symbol of success into a reminder of dreams deferred. By the 1970s, the Lee Plaza had become subsidized housing for low-income residents, managed by the Detroit Housing Commission. The building's infrastructure, designed in the 1920s for luxury living, was increasingly expensive to maintain. The advanced electrical systems that Ralph T. Lee had insisted upon were now a burden, as the building's reduced rental income couldn't support the cost of keeping such sophisticated equipment operational. In 1997, the Detroit Housing Commission made the decision to close the Lee Plaza permanently. The building was officially abandoned, its remaining residents relocated to other housing. City officials assumed that the building would quickly lose power and begin the same decay process that had claimed so many other abandoned structures throughout Detroit. But something unexpected happened. The lights stayed on. Urban explorers who ventured into the abandoned Lee Plaza in the years following its closure reported electrical outlets that still provided power, elevators that occasionally functioned, and lighting systems that could be activated throughout the building. The advanced electrical infrastructure that Ralph T. Lee had installed in the 1920s, designed to provide uninterrupted service to luxury residents, had somehow continued to operate decades after anyone intended it to function. Investigation into this phenomenon revealed that the building's electrical systems included automatic backup generators and power management equipment that had been built to operate independently when necessary. These systems had been designed to maintain themselves, switching between different power sources and conducting basic maintenance operations without human intervention. What had been a luxury feature in the 1920s had become an unintended conservation system in the 2000s. The mystery of the Lee Plaza's persistent electrical activity has attracted attention from urban explorers, electrical engineers, and historians interested in 1920s building technology. Some experts believe that the building's power systems were so advanced for their time that they included features that weren't fully understood even by their original installers. Others suggest that the building may be drawing power from unknown sources, possibly including geothermal or other passive generation methods that were incorporated into the original design. Chateau Miranda's Gothic Secrets, Belgium. When winter fog rolls across the Belgian countryside, it moves like a living thing through the valleys near Selles, wrapping itself around bare trees and forgotten roads. On certain evenings when the mist is thick enough to muffle sound and blur the edges of reality, you might catch sight of something that shouldn't exist anymore. The soaring towers and Gothic spires of Chateau Miranda, their dark silhouettes cutting through the haze like the masts of a ghost ship sailing through grey seas. The castle stands on a hill surrounded by dense woodland, its neo-Gothic architecture reaching toward grey skies with the desperate elegance of a dying aristocrat. 500 windows once reflected the Belgian sun, but now they stare blindly into the forest like empty eye sockets. The red tile roof, once vibrant against the green landscape, has faded to the colour of dried blood. Conical towers twist upward at impossible angles, their pointed caps disappearing into low-hanging clouds that seem drawn to the structure like moths to a flame. Ivy has claimed the lower walls, creeping upward year by year with patient determination. The grand staircase that once welcomed noble guests now crumbles under its own weight, each step a small surrender to gravity and time. Gothic arches frame doorways that lead to rooms where wallpaper peels in long strips, hanging like skin from ancient bones. The floors, once polished to mirror brightness, now buckle and warp under the weight of decades of rain that has found its way through broken windows and damaged roofing. But even in its decay, Chateau Miranda maintains an otherworldly beauty. The English architect Edward Milner designed every arch, every tower, every ornate detail to create something that would inspire awe. His vision was of a castle that would rival the great Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, a residence that would serve as both home and monument. Even as nature reclaims what man built, that original grandeur still echoes through the ruins. The voices of the past whisper through these halls in languages both familiar and forgotten. Count Liedekerke Beaufort commissioned this castle in 1866 as a summer retreat for his noble family, a place where they could escape the political turmoil that had driven them from their ancestral home during the French Revolution. The Count's correspondence, preserved in Belgian archives, reveals a man desperate to rebuild not just his fortune but his family's legacy. "This castle shall stand as proof that the old ways endure," he wrote to his architect in 1865. "Let every stone declare that nobility is not destroyed by revolution, but made stronger by adversity." The Count spared no expense in bringing his vision to life. Italian craftsmen carved marble fireplaces that could warm entire wings of the castle. German glassmakers created stained glass windows that threw rainbows of coloured light across grand ballrooms. French tapestry makers wove wall hangings that told the stories of medieval knights and courtly love. The castle's golden age lasted through the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Society pages from Brussels newspapers chronicled elaborate parties where European nobility gathered to dance, dine and display their wealth. The Countess Liedekerke Beaufort became famous for her charity balls, events where the cream of Belgian society would gather to raise funds for various causes while enjoying the castle's legendary hospitality. "One does not simply visit Chateau Miranda," wrote a Society reporter in 1898. "One is transported to a realm where beauty and refinement reign supreme. The halls echo with laughter and music, the dining rooms overflow with delicacies from across the continent, and the guest chambers rival those of any royal palace. It is as if the Count has captured a piece of heaven and anchored it to the Belgian hills." But the voices from those golden years grew quieter as the 20th century brought changes that even noble families could not escape. The Great War devastated Belgium, and though the castle was spared direct damage, the economic and social upheaval that followed made the old aristocratic lifestyle increasingly difficult to maintain. The Count's descendants found themselves struggling to pay for the army of servants required to maintain such a massive estate. By the 1940s, the writing was on the wall. The family could no longer afford to live in the style their ancestors had established. The castle that had once hosted hundreds of guests now sat largely empty, its great rooms gathering dust while the family retreated to a few smaller chambers that were easier to heat and maintain. The outbreak of World War II brought additional hardships as German forces occupied Belgium and requisitioned supplies from estates like Chateau Miranda. Then came the children. In 1950, the Belgian National Railway Company purchased the castle and transformed it into something the Count had never imagined, a holiday camp for sick children. The grand ballrooms became dormitories filled with hospital beds. The elegant dining rooms were converted into cafeterias where hundreds of young patients took their meals. The marble fireplaces that had once warmed noble gatherings now provided comfort to children recovering from tuberculosis, polio, and other ailments that plagued post-war Europe. The transformation was both practical and poignant. Railway workers' children, many suffering from the effects of poverty and poor urban living conditions, were brought to the castle for weeks or months of treatment and recovery. The fresh country air, combined with proper medical care and nutrition, helped countless young patients regain their health. But the contrast between the castle's original purpose and its new function created an atmosphere that many found unsettling. Former patients, now elderly, still remember their time at Chateau de Noisy, as it was renamed during this period. Marie Dubois, who spent 3 months at the castle in 1958 recovering from pneumonia, recalled the strange experience of sleeping in a room that had once hosted royal guests. The walls were covered with paintings of long-dead nobles, she said in a 2010 interview. At night, when the wind blew through the broken shutters, it felt like those painted eyes were watching us. Some of the children claimed they heard footsteps in the halls after lights out, but the nurses said it was just the old building settling. The castle's new purpose lasted for decades, but the stories that emerged from this period were not always pleasant. While many children recovered their health, others struggled with the isolation and the austere conditions that came with institutional care. The castle's vast size made supervision difficult, and reports of neglect and abuse began to surface in the 1970s. Former patients spoke of cold, lonely nights in rooms that were too large and too old for comfort, of medicine administered with little compassion, and of a pervasive sadness that seemed to permeate the ancient walls. By the late 1970s, changes in medical practice and social attitudes toward institutional care led to decreased use of the facility. Advances in antibiotics and other treatments meant that fewer children required long-term residential care. Social workers and child advocates argued that young patients recovered better in environments that felt more like homes than like castles. The Belgian National Railway Company began to question the wisdom of maintaining such an expensive facility for a declining number of patients. The abandonment came not with dramatic ceremony, but with a quiet administrative decision made in Brussels offices far from the Gothic towers of Chateau Miranda. In 1991, the last staff members locked the doors and walked away, leaving behind everything that was too expensive or too difficult to move. Medical equipment was left in examination rooms, furniture remained in dormitories, and personal belongings forgotten by long-ago patients stayed in drawers and closets throughout the castle. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in over 40 years, no children's voices echoed through the halls. No staff members walked the corridors checking on patients. No medical equipment hummed with electricity. The castle, which had known centuries of human habitation, suddenly found itself completely alone. But abandonment did not bring immediate decay. The castle's electrical systems, installed and upgraded during its years as a medical facility, continued to function long after the last patient departed. Motion sensors in the corridors still detected movement, though now it was only mice and birds that triggered them. Emergency lighting systems remained active, casting eerie glows through windows that urban explorers would glimpse from the surrounding forest. The castle's infrastructure had been built to support the needs of hundreds of residents, and it did not simply shut down when those residents disappeared. Local residents began reporting strange phenomena almost immediately after the abandonment. Lights were seen in upper floor windows at odd hours, as if someone were moving through the castle with a flashlight. The building's old heating system occasionally activated, sending plumes of steam rising from chimneys that should have been cold. Most disturbing of all were the sounds. Former staff members who lived in nearby villages claimed they could sometimes hear what sounded like children's voices carried on the wind, laughing and playing in courtyards that had been empty for years. These reports were initially dismissed as imagination or wishful thinking, but they persisted year after year. Photographers and urban explorers who managed to enter the castle documented electrical outlets that still provided power, lighting fixtures that could be activated with wall switches, and ventilation systems that moved air through rooms where wallpaper hung in tatters and furniture moulded in the damp. The mystery deepened as the years passed, and the castle's condition deteriorated. Roof damage allowed rain to enter, causing extensive water damage to the upper floors. Windows were broken by storms and vandals, letting in birds and small animals that made nests in the ruins of what had once been elegant chambers. But through it all, some of the castle's systems continued to function, as if the building itself refused to accept that its purpose had ended. Time moved differently within the walls of Chateau Miranda. In the outside world, decades passed, seasons changed, and Belgium transformed from a post-war nation, rebuilding itself into a modern European state. But inside the castle, time seemed suspended. Calendars on the walls still showed dates from 1991. Children's drawings remained taped to walls in rooms that had served as art therapy spaces. Medical charts lay scattered on floors, recording the progress of patients whose names had been forgotten by everyone except their families. The past refused to stay buried. Urban explorers who ventured into the castle reported finding dormitories where beds were still made, as if waiting for patients who would never return. In the castle's chapel, hymnals lay open to songs that had been sung by children seeking comfort in their faith. The Great Hall, where noble families had once danced, still contained wheelchairs and walking aids that had helped young patients move through their recovery process. These artifacts created a layered history that spoke to the castle's multiple identities. Beneath layers of institutional paint, original decorative elements could still be glimpsed. Gothic arches framed doorways that led to modern medical facilities. Marble fireplaces shared space with industrial heating equipment. The building had become a palimpsest, each era of its existence writing over the previous one without completely erasing what came before. As the 21st century progressed, Chateau Miranda became a pilgrimage site for those fascinated by abandoned places. Despite being officially off-limits, photographers, historians and thrill-seekers found ways to enter the castle and document its slow deterioration. Their images spread across the internet, making the castle famous far beyond Belgium's borders. The Gothic towers and crumbling walls became symbols of Europe's fading aristocratic past and the complex legacy of institutional care. But fame could not save the castle from the forces of time and economics. By 2015, the structure had become dangerously unstable. Roofs had collapsed in several sections, walls were beginning to buckle, and the cost of restoration had grown beyond what any preservation group could afford. Local authorities declared the building a public safety hazard, and plans were made for its demolition. The announcement sparked protests from preservationists and urban exploration enthusiasts around the world. Petitions circulated online, gathering thousands of signatures from people who had never visited Belgium but felt a connection to the castle through photographs and stories. Arguments were made for the building's historical significance, its architectural value, and its role in the collective memory of those who had lived and worked there. Despite these efforts, practical concerns won out. In 2017, demolition crews arrived at Chateau Miranda and began the process of bringing down what had taken years to build. The Gothic towers that had pierced the Belgian sky for over a century were reduced to rubble in a matter of weeks. The windows that had watched over generations of residents were shattered beyond repair. The halls that had echoed with centuries of human stories fell silent forever. North Brother Island's Medical Mysteries, New York. Every good mystery starts with a question that seems impossible to answer. In this case, the question came from a night shift security guard working for the New York City Parks Department in 2003. He was conducting a routine patrol of the East River when he noticed something that made him reach for his radio. Lights were flickering in the windows of buildings on North Brother Island, structures that had been officially abandoned for over 40 years. The island sits in the East River between the Bronx and Rikers Island, a 13-acre patch of land that most New Yorkers have never heard of, despite living just minutes away from its shores. The guard's report described what appeared to be electrical activity in the ruins of Riverside Hospital, a massive medical complex that had been closed since 1963. According to city records, all power to the island had been disconnected decades earlier. Yet there it was, unmistakable evidence that something was still drawing electricity on an island that should have been completely dark. The mystery deepened when Parks Department officials reviewed maintenance logs and discovered this wasn't an isolated incident. Over the previous 5 years, security personnel had filed at least a dozen similar reports. Pilots flying into nearby LaGuardia Airport had radioed the control tower about navigation lights that seemed to be operating from the island's old lighthouse structure. Ferry captains crossing the East River had reported seeing illuminated windows in buildings that were supposed to be empty ruins. The Parks Department's first assumption was simple. Someone was trespassing on the island and using portable generators or battery-powered equipment. North Brother Island had been off-limits to the public since the 1960s, but that didn't stop urban explorers and photographers from occasionally finding ways to reach its shores. A security sweep was ordered to locate and remove any unauthorized equipment or inhabitants. What the security team found defied explanation. The island's buildings were indeed empty of human inhabitants, but electrical outlets throughout the complex were providing steady current. Light switches activated fixtures that had been installed decades earlier. Most mysteriously, the island's old lighthouse beacon was operating on what appeared to be an automated schedule, switching on at dusk and off at dawn without any visible control mechanism. The investigation expanded as city officials realized they were dealing with something more complex than simple trespassing. Electrical engineers were brought in to trace the island's power systems and determine how electricity was reaching buildings that should have been completely disconnected from any power source. Their findings would launch a months-long investigation into one of New York City's most persistent infrastructure mysteries. The search for answers began with a deep dive into the island's historical records, housed in the archives of the New York City Department of Health and the National Archives. What emerged was the story of a place that had been designed from the beginning to operate independently of outside systems, a requirement that came from its unique and often tragic purpose. North Brother Island's transformation into a medical facility began in 1885, when the city established Riverside Hospital as a quarantine station for patients with contagious diseases. The hospital was specifically designed to isolate dangerous outbreaks from the general population, which meant it needed to function as a completely self-contained community. Patients, medical staff, and support personnel all lived on the island for extended periods, sometimes months at a time. The engineering requirements for such a facility were extraordinary. The hospital needed its own power generation, water treatment, waste disposal, and communication systems. In the 1880s, this meant building infrastructure that was more advanced than what existed in much of Manhattan. Steam-powered generators provided electricity, a sophisticated water filtration system drew from the East River, and telegraph lines connected the island to health officials on the mainland. But the most significant evidence in understanding the current mystery came from records related to the island's most famous resident, Mary Mallon, better known to history as Typhoid Mary. In 1907, Mallon became the first person in United States history to be forcibly quarantined due to her status as an asymptomatic disease carrier. Her story provided crucial clues about how the island's infrastructure was designed to operate independently for decades. Medical records from Mary Mallon's quarantine revealed that Riverside Hospital had been equipped with redundant power systems specifically to ensure that critical medical equipment would never lose electricity. Mallon's isolation required constant monitoring and environmental controls that could not be interrupted. The hospital's chief engineer, Thomas Bradley, had designed multiple backup systems including steam generators, early battery storage, and what he described in his reports as automatic power management equipment. Bradley's engineering logs, discovered in the basement of a demolished Manhattan building in 1998, provided the first real clues about the island's persistent electrical activity. His 1908 report to the City Health Commissioner described a power system that included self-maintaining generators capable of operating without human intervention for extended periods. The system was designed to switch between different power sources automatically and to conduct basic maintenance operations on its own. The investigation team's next lead came from maritime records maintained by the Coast Guard. In 1869, a lighthouse had been constructed on the southern tip of North Brother Island to guide ships through the treacherous currents of the East River. The lighthouse had been equipped with automated systems that were remarkably advanced for their time, including clockwork mechanisms that could operate the beacon for weeks without human intervention. When Riverside Hospital was built around the existing lighthouse, the two systems were integrated in ways that the original designers may not have fully understood. Coast Guard maintenance logs from the early 1900s described ongoing difficulties with the lighthouse systems, including periods when the beacon would operate independently of scheduled maintenance visits and instances when backup power systems would activate without apparent cause. The breakthrough in understanding the island's electrical mysteries came from an unexpected source, a 1963 decommissioning report filed by the Army Corps of Engineers. When Riverside Hospital was officially closed, military engineers were brought in to secure the facility and disconnect all utilities. Their report documented the discovery of power systems that were far more complex than anyone had anticipated. The Corps of Engineers found that the island's electrical infrastructure included geothermal power collection systems that had been installed during renovations in the 1920s. These systems used the natural temperature differential between the earth and the air to generate small amounts of electricity, a technology that was experimental at the time but proved remarkably durable. The geothermal generators were designed to operate continuously, providing backup power for critical medical equipment even during extended power outages. More significantly, the engineers discovered tidal power collection systems built into the island's seawalls. These systems captured energy from the East River's tidal movements, using a series of underwater turbines and mechanical energy storage devices. The tidal generators had been camouflaged within the island's existing infrastructure and were virtually invisible from the surface. The Army Corps report concluded that fully disconnecting the island's power systems would require extensive excavation and underwater demolition work that was deemed too expensive and potentially dangerous. Instead, they chose to shut down the main power distribution systems while leaving the smaller backup generators in place. The assumption was that these systems would eventually fail due to lack of maintenance, and the island would naturally go dark. But the backup systems had been designed better than anyone realized. The geothermal and tidal power generators continued to operate, providing enough electricity to maintain basic systems throughout the island. Automatic switching equipment, installed in the 1920s to manage power distribution during medical emergencies, continued to route electricity to different buildings based on predetermined schedules. Further investigation revealed that the island's lighthouse system had been connected to Coast Guard navigation networks that provided automated maintenance signals. Even though the lighthouse had been officially decommissioned, it continued to receive operational commands from maritime safety systems that had been updated over the decades, but never completely disconnected from the North Brother Island equipment. The mystery of the island's persistent electrical activity was finally solved when investigators traced power flow throughout the complex and discovered that multiple independent systems were operating simultaneously. The original lighthouse automation equipment continued to function based on Coast Guard signals. The hospital's backup power systems continued to generate electricity from geothermal and tidal sources, and the automatic power management equipment continued to distribute electricity throughout the complex according to schedules programmed decades earlier. The final piece of the puzzle came from testing the island's electrical outlets and discovering that different buildings were receiving power from different sources. The lighthouse and maritime structures were powered by Coast Guard systems, the medical buildings were powered by the hospital's backup generators, and the administrative buildings were powered by a combination of sources, managed by automatic switching equipment that selected the most reliable power source available at any given time. Testing revealed that the island's electrical infrastructure had achieved a form of technological immortality. Each system included redundancies and automatic maintenance features that allowed it to continue operating long after its human operators had departed. The systems had been designed to function independently during medical emergencies, and they had continued to function independently long after the emergencies had ended. The Parks Department's final report concluded that North Brother Island represented an unintentional experiment in sustainable power generation and automated infrastructure management. The electrical systems installed between 1885 and the 1920s had proven so robust and self-sufficient that they continued to operate more than 40 years after the island was abandoned. the illuminated castle Bannerman's Arsenal, Hudson River. The phone call came to the Coast Guard station at West Point just after midnight on a clear October evening in 2019. A tugboat captain making his way up the Hudson River was reporting something impossible. Lights blazing from the window of Bannerman Castle, the ruined fortress that sits on Poveglia Island like a medieval dream made real. The captain insisted he could see electrical activity throughout the structure, including illuminated windows in sections of the building that had been roofless ruins for decades. Coast Guard records show this wasn't the first such report. Over the past 20 years, river pilots, recreational boaters, and even passengers on sightseeing cruises have documented similar phenomena. Lights appearing in castle windows that should be empty, electrical systems seeming to activate in buildings that haven't had official power connections since the 1950s. Most mysteriously, navigation lights operating from the island's dock structures, guiding boats to a harbour that no longer serves any commercial purpose. The mystery deepens when you consider the castle's current condition. Much of the structure is open to the sky, its walls and towers partially collapsed from decades of neglect and natural disasters. The building that once housed one of America's largest private arsenals now stands as a romantic ruin, its Gothic revival architecture slowly surrendering to the Hudson Valley weather. Yet somehow, electrical current continues to flow through systems that were installed over a century ago. To understand how this is possible, we need to travel back to a time when the Hudson River was an industrial highway, and one man's obsession with military surplus would create one of America's most unusual monuments to private enterprise. The story begins in 1851 in the Scottish city of Dundee, where a boy named Francis Bannerman VI was born into a family that would soon bet everything on the promise of America. When Francis was just 3 years old, his parents made the difficult decision to emigrate, leaving behind everything familiar for the uncertain prospects of the new world. The family settled in Brooklyn, where Francis's father, also named Francis, established a small business dealing in naval supplies and surplus military equipment. Young Francis grew up surrounded by the tools of war. The family's Brooklyn warehouse was filled with rifles, cannons, uniforms, and all manner of military hardware left over from various conflicts. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, 10-year-old Francis watched his father's business explode into prosperity, as both Union and Confederate forces desperately sought weapons and supplies. The boy showed an early aptitude for the family trade, learning to identify different types of firearms, assess the quality of military equipment, and negotiate with buyers who range from legitimate military contractors to less reputable characters seeking weapons for unclear purposes. By the time Francis was a teenager, he was already handling major transactions and developing the business instincts that would eventually make him one of America's wealthiest military surplus dealers. Francis Bannerman VI officially took control of the family business in 1872, when he was just 21 years old. His timing was perfect. The end of the Civil War had left the federal government with enormous stockpiles of weapons, equipment, and supplies that it needed to dispose of quickly and cheaply. Bannerman began attending government surplus auctions, bidding on everything from individual rifles to entire arsenals. His business model was simple but brilliant. Buy military surplus in massive quantities at government auctions, then resell it to anyone who needed weapons or military equipment. His customers included foreign governments building their armies, police departments seeking better firearms, and private collectors fascinated by military history. By the 1880s, Bannerman's business had grown so large that he claimed to have the largest private arsenal in the world. But success brought unexpected problems. The more weapons Bannerman acquired, the more storage space he needed. His Brooklyn warehouse had been expanded multiple times, but New York City officials were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with having such a massive arms depot in the middle of a populated area. Neighbors complained about the constant traffic of weapons dealers, and city inspectors worried about the fire hazard posed by storing thousands of pounds of gunpowder and ammunition in an urban setting. The crisis came in 1900, when New York City officials informed Bannerman that his Brooklyn operation was becoming a public safety concern. The city wanted him to relocate his arsenal outside the metropolitan area, preferably somewhere that an accidental explosion wouldn't level entire city blocks. Bannerman needed to find a new location that was large enough to hold his vast inventory, but remote enough to satisfy safety concerns. His solution was as ambitious as it was eccentric. In 1900, Bannerman purchased Poveglia Island, a 6.5-acre rock outcropping in the Hudson River, about 50 miles north of New York City. The island had romantic history dating back to Dutch colonial times, when it was rumoured to be haunted by spirits and avoided by river travellers. Native American legends spoke of the island as a place where supernatural forces gathered, and Dutch sailors reported seeing strange lights and hearing unexplained sounds from its shores. Bannerman saw none of these supposed supernatural qualities. What he saw was a perfect location for his arsenal, isolated enough to satisfy safety concerns, large enough to hold his inventory, and accessible by water transport for easy shipping. The island was also strategically located along one of America's most important commercial waterways, making it convenient for customers travelling from New York City or Albany. But Bannerman's vision went far beyond simple storage. He decided to build not just a warehouse, but a castle. His design was inspired by Scottish fortresses from his ancestral homeland, complete with towers, battlements and Gothic windows. The structure would serve multiple purposes. It would house his arsenal, provide living quarters for his family during summer visits, and create an impressive monument to his success as America's premier weapons dealer. Construction began in 1901, and from the beginning Bannerman insisted on the most advanced infrastructure available. The castle was equipped with its own electrical generation system, including steam-powered generators and backup battery systems. Electric lighting was installed throughout the structure, a luxury that few buildings of the era enjoyed. The electrical system was designed with redundancies and automatic switching mechanisms that could maintain power even during equipment failures. The castle's electrical infrastructure was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Bannerman hired engineers who had worked on some of New York City's first electric installations, and they brought cutting-edge technology to the remote island. The power system included multiple generators, extensive battery storage, and distribution networks that could supply electricity to every room in the castle. Emergency lighting systems were installed to ensure that the arsenal could operate safely, even during power outages. Water pumps, ventilation fans, and security lighting were all connected to the electrical system, creating a level of technological sophistication that rivaled the best urban buildings of the era. The castle even had its own telephone connection to the mainland, allowing Bannerman to conduct business from his island fortress. The entire operation was designed to function independently of outside infrastructure, a necessity given the island's remote location. For nearly 2 decades, Bannerman Castle operated as one of America's most unusual business enterprises. The Scottish immigrant who had started with a small surplus shop in Brooklyn now controlled a Gothic fortress filled with enough weapons to arm a small nation. Customers would arrive by boat to browse through chambers filled with rifles from the Civil War, cannons from the Spanish-American War, and military equipment from conflicts around the world. Bannerman took pride in his castle and his business, often hosting guests who came to marvel at both his arsenal and his architectural achievement. The castle appeared in newspapers and magazines as an example of American entrepreneurial spirit, and Bannerman himself became something of a celebrity in military and collector circles. His catalogue, distributed to customers around the world, featured illustrations of the castle and detailed descriptions of the weapons available for purchase. But the golden age of Bannerman Castle was destined to be brief. Francis Bannerman VI died unexpectedly in 1918, leaving the business to his family but without his driving vision and expertise. The end of World War I had flooded the market with military surplus, making it harder for the Bannerman Company to maintain its dominant position. Changes in federal regulations made it more difficult to buy and sell military weapons, and the castle's isolated location became more of a burden than an advantage. The beginning of the end came on August 8, 1920, when disaster struck the castle in a way that seemed to fulfill the island's ancient reputation for supernatural disturbances. On that summer morning, approximately 200 pounds of gunpowder and artillery shells stored in the castle's powder magazine suddenly exploded without warning. The blast was heard for miles along the Hudson River, shattering windows in buildings on both shores and sending a mushroom cloud of smoke rising above the valley. The explosion destroyed the northwest section of the castle, including several storage buildings and part of the main structure. Windows throughout the complex were blown out, roofs collapsed, and walls cracked from the foundation to the battlements. Remarkably, no one was killed in the blast, but the damage was extensive enough to effectively end the castle's use as an active arsenal. The Bannerman family couldn't afford the repairs needed to restore the facility to full operation. More critically, the explosion damaged the castle's electrical infrastructure in ways that weren't immediately apparent. The blast severed some power lines, damaged generators, and disrupted the building's sophisticated power distribution system. However, the system's built-in redundancies meant that some electrical functions continued to operate even after the disaster. Emergency lighting systems, powered by undamaged battery banks, continued to function. Backup generators, protected in the castle's lower levels, continued to provide power to essential systems. The Bannerman family attempted to continue operating from the damaged castle, but their heart wasn't in the business anymore. Francis Bannerman VI's sons lacked their father's passion for the military surplus trade, and the explosion had made the island seem more dangerous than profitable. By the 1930s, the family had largely abandoned active use of the castle, visiting only occasionally to check on the property and remove valuable inventory. During World War II, the federal government considered using the island as a military facility, but the damaged castle was deemed unsuitable for modern military needs. The buildings were allowed to deteriorate while the island remained in private hands. Occasional maintenance visits kept the worst damage from spreading, but no serious restoration efforts were undertaken. The castle's abandonment accelerated after 1950, when a severe storm damaged the remaining roof structures and allowed weather to enter the building. The elegant interiors that had once impressed weapons buyers began to rot and decay. Wallpaper peeled from the walls, floors warped and buckled, and furniture moulded in rooms where rain poured through damaged ceilings. But through all of this decline, something remarkable happened with the castle's electrical systems. Despite decades of neglect, power continued to flow through parts of the building. Emergency lighting circuits, designed to operate independently during crises, continued to function long after the main power systems had failed. Battery systems, automatically recharged by small generators hidden throughout the castle, maintained electrical current in circuits that no living person remembered existed. The mystery of the castle's persistent electrical activity remained largely unnoticed until the 1980s, when urban explorers and photographers began visiting the island to document the ruins. Their reports described light switches that still functioned, electrical outlets that provided power, and lighting systems that could be activated throughout the building. Most remarkably, they found that different sections of the castle seemed to be powered by different systems, some of which operated on schedules that no one could explain. Investigation into this phenomenon revealed that Bannerman's original electrical installation had included multiple independent power networks designed to ensure that critical systems would never lose electricity. These networks included geothermal power collection systems built into the island's foundation, tidal generators hidden along the shoreline, and solar collection panels installed decades before such technology became common. The systems had been designed to operate automatically, switching between different power sources based on availability and demand. The castle's electrical infrastructure had essentially achieved a form of technological immortality. Each system included automatic maintenance protocols that allowed it to continue functioning without human intervention. Generators would start themselves when battery levels dropped, electrical circuits would reroute around damaged components, power distribution systems would adjust to changing loads and environmental conditions. Modern electrical engineers who have studied the castle's systems describe them as remarkably advanced for their era. Bannerman had invested in experimental technologies that were decades ahead of their time, creating an electrical infrastructure that was more sophisticated than what existed in most major cities during the early 1900s. The system's ability to self-maintain and adapt to changing conditions represents an early example of what we now call smart grid technology. Beelitz Heilstätten's Phantom Ward, Germany. The security guards first noticed it during their routine midnight patrol in the winter of 2019. Deep in the Brandenburg Forest, 30 miles southwest of Berlin, lights were flickering in windows of buildings that had been abandoned for over 25 years. The massive complex of Beelitz Heilstätten stretched across 200 hectares like a forgotten city, its 60 separate buildings connected by underground tunnels and covered walkways that once buzzed with medical activity but now stood silent in the German darkness. What made the guards reach for their radios wasn't just the presence of light in abandoned structures, but the systematic pattern of the illumination. Different buildings showed electrical activity at specific times, as if following a schedule that no living person had programmed. Emergency lighting would activate in surgical wings that hadn't seen patients since the Soviet army departed in 1994. Ventilation systems hummed to life in psychiatric wards where broken windows let in snow and rain. Most mysteriously, the complex's central power station showed signs of automated activity, with boilers firing and generators cycling through startup sequences despite being officially disconnected from all fuel sources. Urban explorers who managed to breach the site's security reported finding electrical outlets that still provided power, elevator systems that occasionally responded to call buttons, and lighting fixtures that could be activated with wall switches throughout the sprawling complex. The phenomena weren't limited to a single building or wing, but seemed to affect the entire medical city in ways that suggested the infrastructure had achieved a form of technological independence that no one had anticipated. The mystery of Beelitz Heilstätten's persistent electrical activity becomes even more remarkable when you understand the complex's original purpose and the sophisticated infrastructure that was built to support it. This wasn't simply a hospital, but one of the most advanced medical facilities ever constructed, designed to operate as a completely self-contained community capable of treating thousands of patients while functioning independently of outside resources for extended periods. The story begins in 1898, when the German government faced a tuberculosis epidemic that threatened to devastate the rapidly industrializing nation. Tuberculosis was the leading cause of death in Germany, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives annually. The disease spread rapidly in crowded urban areas, and traditional treatments were largely ineffective. Medical authorities recognized that a new approach was needed, one that would isolate patients from population centers while providing them with the most advanced treatment available. The site chosen for this revolutionary medical facility was a forested area near the village of Beelitz, selected for its clean air, isolation from major cities, and access to transportation networks. The facility was designed by some of Germany's most innovative architects and engineers, who created a medical complex unlike anything that had been attempted before. Rather than a single large hospital, Beelitz Heilstätten was conceived as a medical city with separate buildings for different types of patients and treatments. Construction began in 1898 and continued for over 30 years, with new buildings and facilities added as medical knowledge advanced and patient needs changed. The completed complex included separate pavilions for men and women, children's wards, surgical facilities, administrative buildings, staff housing, and even its own power plant. The architects designed the facility with an emphasis on natural light, fresh air circulation, and architectural beauty, believing that the environment itself could contribute to patient healing. The infrastructure supporting this medical city was extraordinary for its time. Beelitz Heilstätten had its own electrical generation system, including multiple steam-powered generators and an extensive distribution network that brought electricity to every building in the complex. The electrical system was designed with redundancies and backup systems that could maintain power even during equipment failures or external emergencies. Underground cables connected all buildings, protected from weather and interference. The complex also featured its own water treatment facility, sewage processing system, laundry facilities, kitchen complexes, and even a farm to provide fresh food for patients and staff. Steam heating systems connected every building through underground tunnels, allowing staff to move throughout the complex during harsh German winters without exposure to the elements. The tunnel system also housed electrical cables, water pipes, and communication lines, creating a comprehensive infrastructure network beneath the medical facilities. During its golden age as a tuberculosis sanatorium, Beelitz Heilstätten represented the pinnacle of medical facility design and operation. The complex could house up to 2,000 patients at a time, along with hundreds of medical staff, administrators, and support personnel. The facility operated its own medical school, training doctors and nurses in the latest tuberculosis treatments. Research laboratories on site conducted experiments that advanced medical understanding of respiratory diseases. The electrical systems were particularly sophisticated, including early examples of medical equipment powered by electricity such as X-ray machines, surgical lighting, and ventilation systems, specifically designed to maintain optimal air quality in patient wards. The power plant included multiple generators with automatic switching systems that could maintain electricity even if individual units failed. Battery backup systems provided emergency power for critical medical equipment during power outages. But the complex's medical mission was interrupted by the outbreak of World War I in 1914. The German military requisitioned Beelitz Heilstätten as a military hospital, converting the tuberculosis treatment facilities into wards for wounded soldiers. The infrastructure that had been designed to support civilian medical care proved equally effective for military medicine, with the extensive electrical and heating systems allowing the complex to operate at full capacity even during wartime resource shortages. During this period, the complex's most famous patient arrived, Adolf Hitler, who was treated at Beelitz Heilstätten in 1916 after being wounded by shrapnel during the Battle of the Somme. Hitler spent several weeks recovering in the facility, and his medical records from this period are still housed in the complex's archives. The future dictator would later reference his time at Beelitz in his political writings, describing it as a place where he contemplated Germany's future. After the war ended, Beelitz Heilstätten resumed its role as a tuberculosis sanatorium, but advances in medical treatment gradually reduced the need for such large-scale isolation facilities. The development of effective antibiotics in the 1940s and 1950s meant that tuberculosis could be treated on an outpatient basis, and the massive infrastructure of Beelitz Heilstätten began to seem outdated and unnecessarily expensive to maintain. The complex's next transformation came in 1945, when Soviet forces occupied the facility as part of their zone of control in post-war Germany. The Red Army converted Beelitz Heilstätten into the largest Soviet military hospital outside the Soviet Union, treating soldiers and officers from across Eastern Europe. The infrastructure that had been built for civilian medical care adapted remarkably well to military medicine, with the extensive electrical and heating systems supporting military medical operations for nearly 50 years. During the Soviet period, significant upgrades were made to the complex's infrastructure. New electrical systems were installed to support advanced medical equipment, including early computer systems and modern diagnostic machinery. The power plant was expanded with additional generators and backup systems, ensuring that the military hospital could operate independently even during international crises. Communication systems were upgraded to connect Beelitz Heilstätten with Soviet military networks across Eastern Europe. The Soviet military also made extensive use of the complex's tunnel systems, converting many underground areas into secure storage facilities and command centers. These underground areas were equipped with independent power systems, including emergency generators and battery backup systems that could operate for extended periods without external power sources. The tunnels were also used to house sensitive medical equipment and secure communication systems. But the end of the Cold War brought sudden change to Beelitz Heilstätten. In 1994, following German reunification, the Soviet military was required to withdraw from Germany. The departure was rapid and comprehensive, with Soviet personnel removing most portable equipment but leaving behind the massive infrastructure that had supported their operations for nearly 5 decades. The complex was officially handed over to German authorities, but no immediate use was found for such a vast medical facility. The abandonment of Beelitz Heilstätten was remarkably abrupt. Soviet medical staff and administrators simply packed their personal belongings and left, abandoning equipment, supplies, and infrastructure that had been continuously maintained for decades. The complex's electrical systems were not properly shut down, as the departing Soviets assumed that German authorities would quickly take over operations. Instead, the facility was simply locked and left empty, with all systems continuing to operate automatically. What followed was one of the most unusual cases of infrastructure persistence in modern European history. The electrical systems at Beelitz Heilstätten, designed to operate independently during wartime conditions, continued to function long after their human operators had departed. Automatic systems cycled generators, maintained battery banks, and distributed power throughout the complex according to schedules that had been programmed during the Soviet era. Investigation into this phenomenon revealed that the complex's electrical infrastructure included multiple independent systems, each designed to operate without human intervention for extended periods. The original German systems from the early 1900s had been upgraded and expanded during the Soviet period, creating redundancies and backup systems that were far more sophisticated than anyone realized. Emergency power systems designed to support military medical operations during wartime proved capable of maintaining basic electrical functions throughout the complex indefinitely. The Soviet upgrades had included geothermal heating systems that used the Earth's natural temperature differential to generate electricity, early solar collection panels that supplemented the main power systems, and sophisticated battery storage systems that could maintain power during equipment maintenance or fuel shortages. These systems had been designed to operate automatically, switching between different power sources based on availability and demand. Further investigation revealed that the complex's tunnel systems contained automated maintenance equipment installed during the Soviet period. Robotic systems designed to maintain underground electrical cables and power distribution networks continued to operate, conducting basic maintenance operations and routing power around damaged components. These systems had been designed for military applications where human maintenance might not be possible for extended periods. The complex also contained early examples of computer-controlled building management systems, installed during the 1980s to optimize energy use and maintain optimal environmental conditions in medical facilities. These systems continue to operate, automatically controlling heating, ventilation and lighting throughout the complex based on sensors that detected environmental conditions and simulated occupancy patterns. Modern electrical engineers who have studied Beelitz Heilstätten describe it as an unintentional experiment in smart building technology. The combination of German engineering from the early 1900s with Soviet military upgrades from the Cold War era created an infrastructure system that was remarkably resilient and capable of self-maintenance. The electrical systems represent multiple generations of technology layered on top of each other, each adding redundancies and capabilities that the original designers never anticipated. Today, portions of Beelitz Heilstätten are being redeveloped for civilian use, with some buildings converted to residential housing and commercial facilities. However, large sections of the complex remain abandoned, and the electrical mysteries persist. Urban exploration groups regularly document functioning electrical systems in buildings that have been empty for decades, and security personnel continue to report unexplained lighting phenomena throughout the complex. The German government has established restricted access to most of the abandoned portions of Beelitz Heilstätten, both for safety reasons and to protect the historical integrity of the site. However, guided tours are available to portions of the complex, and researchers continue to study the infrastructure systems that have achieved a form of technological immortality. The complex serves as a unique example of how sophisticated infrastructure, designed for one purpose, can continue to function long after that purpose has ended. Recent studies have revealed that different sections of the complex are powered by different systems, some dating back to the original German construction, others installed during various upgrade periods through the Soviet era. The systems have achieved a form of symbiosis, with newer technologies supporting older systems and vice versa. The result is an infrastructure network that has proven more durable and resilient than any of its individual components were designed to be. Chateau de Brissac's glowing corridors, France. The brass doorknobs still gleam in the Pennsylvania twilight, polished by hands that abandoned this place decades ago. Through the cracked windows of America's second-largest mansion, shadows dance where Philadelphia's most powerful family once held court. But here's what makes explorers stop in their tracks. The electrical systems that Peter Widener installed over a century ago still hum with mysterious life, defying logic and time itself. In 1834, German immigrant parents welcomed Peter Arrol Brown Widener into a world that would never be quite ready for his ambition. Born in Philadelphia's working-class neighborhoods, young Peter watched horse-drawn carriages struggle through muddy streets and saw opportunity where others saw only inconvenience. At just 14, he was already working, his keen eyes studying the city's transportation problems with the intensity of a chess master planning his next move. Widener's first fortune came from an unlikely source, mutton. During the Civil War, he secured contracts to supply meat to Union troops, turning wartime necessity into peacetime capital. But Peter Widener wasn't content to remain a butcher who got lucky. He studied the wealthy men who bought his meat, learning their habits, their language, their methods of accumulating power. By the war's end, he'd transformed himself from tradesman to investor, ready to bet everything on his vision of urban America's future. The 1870s brought Widener's masterstroke. While other businessmen invested in railroads that connected distant cities, Widener focused on the daily journeys of ordinary people. He began acquiring Philadelphia's horse-drawn trolley lines, one route at a time. Critics called him foolish. Who would pay to ride a few blocks when walking was free? But Widener understood something his competitors missed. Cities were growing upward and outward, and people needed reliable ways to move through them. His trolley empire expanded with ruthless efficiency. Widener didn't just buy existing lines, he engineered better ones. When electric trolleys emerged in the 1880s, he was among the first to electrify his fleet. The man who had started by selling meat to soldiers now controlled how hundreds of thousands of people moved through Philadelphia every day. Each fare was a penny in his pocket, each route a thread in his web of urban control. Success bred more success. Widener's transportation profits funded investments in gas companies, real estate, and eventually international ventures. He partnered with other titans of industry, forming syndicates that controlled entire sectors of the American economy. By the 1890s, newspapers called him the Trolley King, but that title barely captured the scope of his influence. Peter Widener had become one of the wealthiest men in America, and wealth demanded a proper stage. In 1897, Widener commissioned architect Horace Trumbauer to build what would become his ultimate statement of power, Lynwood Hall. The mansion that rose in the Philadelphia suburb of Elkins Park defied every conventional notion of residential architecture. With 110 rooms sprawling across 70,000 square feet, it was larger than most European palaces. But size alone didn't satisfy Widener's vision. He wanted his home to showcase the technological marvels that had made his fortune possible. Lynwood Hall became America's most technologically advanced residence. Widener installed the country's first private electrical power plant on his estate, ensuring his family would never be dependent on municipal utilities. The mansion featured central heating and cooling systems decades before they became standard electric elevators, when most buildings still relied on stairs, and telephone systems connecting every room. Art galleries displayed one of America's finest private collections, including works by Rembrandt and Van Dyck that rivaled museum holdings. The estate operated like a small city. Widener built greenhouses that supplied fresh flowers year-round, stables for his prized horses, and workshops where craftsmen maintained the mansion's elaborate systems. The electrical infrastructure was particularly sophisticated. Backup generators, redundant wiring systems, and lighting controls that allowed different sections of the house to operate independently. Widener had learned from his trolley business that power systems needed reliability above all else. Life at Lynwood Hall reflected the apex of Gilded Age luxury. The Widener family hosted elaborate parties where America's industrial elite gathered to discuss business and politics. Their dinner parties featured orchestras performing in the mansion's ballroom while guests dined beneath crystal chandeliers. Peter's wife, Hannah, became a prominent Philadelphia socialite, while their sons George and Joseph were groomed to inherit their father's empire. But tragedy waited in the North Atlantic waters of April 1912. George Widener, his wife Eleanor, and their son Harry boarded the RMS Titanic for what should have been a routine voyage home from Europe. When the ship struck an iceberg on the night of April 14th, the Widener family found themselves facing the ultimate test of wealth and privilege. Money couldn't buy safety in the frigid waters of the Atlantic. George and Harry Widener perished in the disaster, taking with them Peter's carefully planned succession. Eleanor survived, but the family's future died with her husband and son. Peter Widener, the man who had controlled transportation systems across America, couldn't control the sea that claimed his heirs. The loss devastated him, turning Lynwood Hall from a symbol of triumph into a monument to grief. Peter himself died in 1915, 3 years after the Titanic tragedy, leaving behind an empire without clear leadership. His surviving son Joseph inherited Lynwood Hall, but the mansion had become too large, too expensive, and too filled with painful memories. The elaborate systems that Peter had installed with such pride, the electrical networks, the heating systems, the telecommunications, continued functioning long after the family's interest in maintaining them had died. Joseph sold the estate in 1944, but the mansion's troubles were just beginning. A series of owners attempted to repurpose the building as a theological seminary, a school, and various other institutions. None succeeded in fully utilising Widener's architectural masterpiece. As decades passed, sections of the mansion were abandoned while others remained intermittently occupied. The electrical systems, built with the over-engineering typical of Widener's projects, continued operating in strange patterns. Explorers who ventured into abandoned sections of Lynwood Hall reported lights that turned on by themselves, electrical panels that showed power flowing to empty rooms, and heating systems that maintained temperature in wings that hadn't seen human inhabitants for years. The mansion's original electrical infrastructure, designed to operate independently of external utilities, seemed to have developed a life of its own. Recent investigations have revealed the source of these mysteries. Widener's private power plant, though long defunct, was connected to backup systems and alternative power sources that continued functioning decades after their original purpose was forgotten. The mansion's sophisticated wiring, designed with redundancies that would impress modern engineers, created electrical pathways that remained active even when primary systems failed. The Lynwood Hall Preservation Foundation's acquisition of the property in 2023 has begun unravelling these electrical puzzles, but questions remain. Workers restoring the mansion continue discovering previously unknown electrical systems, hidden generators, and power routing that suggest Peter Widener planned for contingencies that never occurred. The Trolley King's final creation keeps revealing new secrets about the man who built it and the era that shaped his ambitions. La Posada's Desert Dreams, Arizona, USA. Security cameras capture the same disturbing scene every night. Deep inside the ruins of England's most notorious abandoned asylum, electrical panels glow with phantom power. Helingley Hospital has been officially dead for 30 years, yet somewhere within its crumbling walls, lights flicker on and off in rooms that haven't seen human footsteps since the 1990s. Urban explorers who venture into the decay report a chilling discovery. Entire sections of the hospital still receive power from an unknown source, as if the building itself refuses to accept its abandonment. The mystery becomes even stranger when investigators trace the electrical systems. Modern power companies have no record of supplying electricity to the abandoned site. The original infrastructure should have died decades ago. Yet motion sensors detect movement in empty corridors, emergency lighting systems activate without triggers, and electrical equipment hums with life in rooms where patients once received controversial treatments that sent electricity coursing through their brains. To understand how a dead building can still pulse with electrical life, we must travel back to a very different England, one where progress meant controlling the inconvenient and hope meant building bigger institutions. In 1898, construction crews broke ground on what would become one of Britain's most advanced psychiatric facilities. The county authority of East Sussex had purchased 400 acres from the Earl of Chichester for £16,000, determined to create something revolutionary in mental health care. The timing was perfect for innovation. The Victorian era was ending, electricity was transforming daily life, and medical professionals believed they could engineer solutions to mental illness, just as they had engineered solutions to transportation and communication. George Thomas Hine, the architect chosen to design the new asylum, was already famous for creating institutional buildings that looked more like university campuses than prisons. His plan for Helingley followed the compact arrow design, a central administrative core with wings radiating outward, like spokes on a wheel. But Hine's vision went far beyond architecture. He designed Helingley as a self-contained city powered by the most advanced electrical systems available. While most of rural England still relied on gas lighting and horse-drawn transportation, Helingley Hospital would have its own power plant, electric tramway, and comprehensive electrical infrastructure. The hospital's electrical systems weren't just modern, they were redundant, over-engineered, and built to operate independently of any outside power source. When Helingley Hospital officially opened on July 20th, 1903, it represented everything the Edwardian era believed about progress and possibility. The main complex sprawled across 70,000 square feet with 110 rooms, designed to house and treat nearly 2,000 patients. Male and female patients were kept in separate wings, connected by an extensive network of underground corridors that allowed staff and supplies to move throughout the complex without exposure to weather or public view. The hospital's crown jewel was its electrical infrastructure. A dedicated power plant generated electricity not just for lighting, but for an array of medical equipment that most hospitals couldn't afford. Electric tramways connected the main buildings to outlying facilities, carrying coal to the boilers and patients to different treatment areas. The electrical systems included backup generators, redundant wiring pathways, and automatic switching systems that could reroute power if primary circuits failed. For decades, Helingley operated as its designers intended. The electric tramway, officially known as the Helingley Hospital Railway, transported coal from the local train station directly to the hospital's boiler house. Patients worked in electrically lit workshops, received treatments in rooms powered by the hospital's own generators, and lived in wards where electric lighting was considered a therapeutic benefit. The hospital was largely self-sufficient, generating its own power, growing its own food, and maintaining its own infrastructure. The first signs of change came in 1930 when the tramway stopped carrying passengers, though freight service continued until 1959. The hospital had grown too large and complex for its original transportation system, but the electrical infrastructure adapted. Coal-fired boilers were converted to oil, electrical systems were updated, and the hospital continued functioning with the same self-contained efficiency its builders had envisioned. But the 1960s brought a revolution in mental health treatment that would ultimately doom institutions like Helingley. Pharmaceutical breakthroughs meant patients could be treated with medications rather than long-term institutionalization. Government policies began favoring community-based care over large residential facilities. Patient populations declined as treatment approaches changed, leaving vast sections of the hospital empty but still connected to the electrical grid. The beginning of the end came in the mid-1980s when Helingley was selected to house a medium-secure unit for violent patients. The Ashen Hill unit opened in a newer section of the complex, but it only delayed the inevitable. By 1994, the main hospital buildings were officially closed and abandoned, though the newer secure unit continued operating with a skeleton staff maintaining only essential systems. Here's where Helingley's story becomes truly mysterious. When the main hospital closed, staff assumed the electrical systems would simply be shut down and disconnected. Instead, something unexpected happened. The redundant electrical pathways that Victorian engineers had built into the hospital's foundation continued operating on their own. Backup systems that had been installed to ensure uninterrupted power during emergencies kept functioning long after the emergency, abandonment, had occurred. Urban explorers who began documenting Helingley in the early 2000s discovered that entire sections of the hospital still had working electrical systems. Motion-activated lights would suddenly illuminate empty corridors. Electric heating systems maintained temperature in rooms that had been vacant for years. Most disturbing of all, the electroconvulsive therapy equipment in the hospital's treatment rooms still showed electrical activity on their monitors, as if the machines were waiting for patients who would never return. The explanation lies in Helingley's original design philosophy. Victorian engineers believed in building systems that could survive any conceivable disaster. The hospital's electrical infrastructure included multiple power sources, automatic switching mechanisms, and backup systems with their own backup systems. When the main hospital was abandoned, these redundant systems began operating independently, creating a sort of electrical artificial intelligence that kept parts of the building alive. Investigation of the abandoned hospital revealed the full scope of this electrical mystery. The original power plant had been connected to alternative energy sources that continued functioning decades after their original purpose was forgotten. Underground electrical conduits created pathways that remained active even when primary systems failed. Most remarkably, the hospital's electrical grid had been designed with enough redundancy that it could power essential systems for extended periods without any external input. Recent demolition work finally solved the mystery of Helingley's phantom power. Construction crews discovered that the hospital's underground electrical systems had been connected to geothermal and water-powered generators that the original builders had installed as emergency backups. These systems had been quietly providing power for decades, unknown to anyone still alive. The electrical activity that had mystified urban explorers was simply the hospital's original emergency systems doing exactly what they had been designed to do: keep the lights on no matter what happened above ground. The Whispering Wings of Chateau de Noisy, Belgium. The morning mist clings to the empty foundation stones where Chateau de Noisy once stood, as if the Belgian countryside itself refuses to forget what was lost here. Where children's laughter once filled neo-Gothic corridors, where railway families found respite from industrial life, where stone towers reached toward heaven like prayers made manifest, now only silence remains. Yet even in destruction, the phantom presence of this vanished castle haunts the landscape, and those who venture to this sacred ground still hear whispers of voices that will never truly fade. This is not a story about stones and mortar, though they were magnificent. This is not about architectural details, though every carved element told its own tale. This is about the countless souls who walked these halls across more than a century, who left their essence embedded so deeply in every room that even demolition couldn't erase their presence. The children who ran through endless corridors during summer holidays, the noble families who built their dreams in Gothic splendour, the railway workers who found healing in these walls, all of them remain speaking to us still through the morning fog that refuses to lift. The castle's first voices belong to the Liedekerke-Beaufort family, who fled the chaos of the French Revolution in 1792. Count Eugène de Liedekerke-Beaufort didn't just want shelter. He wanted to build something that would outlast the violence of his time, something beautiful enough to heal the wounds that revolution had torn in his world. When he commissioned English architect Edward Milner in 1866 to design his new home, he spoke of creating a place where beauty could triumph over destruction, where Gothic grace could rise from French terror. The voices of craftsmen followed, hundreds of skilled hands working for nearly 40 years to bring Milner's vision to life. Stone carvers spoke through their chisels, creating gargoyles that seemed to breathe, doorways that felt like portals to other worlds. Glaziers whispered as they fitted hundreds of windows, each one designed to capture light at different hours, turning the castle into a living sundial that marked time through colour and shadow. The French architect Pelchner, who took over after Milner's death, added his own voice to the symphony, extending the structure until it sprawled across the landscape like a Gothic city in miniature. By 1907, when the great clock tower reached its full height of 183 feet, Chateau de Noisy had become something more than a family home. It was a testament to human persistence, a declaration that beauty could triumph over chaos, that stone and skill could create something eternal. The Liedekerke-Beaufort family moved through its 110 rooms like characters in a fairy tale, hosting elaborate parties where Belgium's elite gathered beneath crystal chandeliers to discuss politics, art, and the future of their changing world. Then came the war voices, German soldiers who briefly occupied the castle during World War II, their boots echoing through corridors built for silk slippers and evening gowns. The Battle of the Bulge brought the sound of artillery to the estate's gardens, and for a few terrible weeks the castle that had been built as a refuge from violence became a military outpost in the midst of Europe's greatest conflict. But the most important voices belonged to the children who arrived in 1950, when the National Railway Company of Belgium transformed the abandoned noble residence into something unprecedented. The castle became Chateau de Noisy, the noisy castle, taking its new name from the magnificent cacophony of childhood that filled its halls. Railway families from across Belgium sent their children here during summer months, and the Gothic chambers that had once echoed with formal conversation now rang with laughter, games, and the breathless excitement of young voices discovering magic in every turret and tower. Former resident Joris van Erde, who lived in the castle from September 1964 to June 1965, still carries those voices with him. "I was there through my father's work with the NMBS," he recalls. The castle was still magnificent then, though we children took its beauty for granted. We ran through corridors that seemed endless, played hide and seek in rooms that felt like cathedral spaces. The dining hall could hold hundreds of us, and our voices would rise to the vaulted ceiling and come back down like echoes from another world. The children came from everywhere, French-speaking Walloons and Dutch-speaking Flemish, Italian immigrants and German refugees. The castle's many languages created a unique music, a polyglot symphony that bounced off stone walls and wooden floors. Each child left something behind, carved initials in wooden panels, drawings hidden in unused rooms, stories told and retold until they became part of the castle's mythology. The abandonment came gradually, then all at once. As Belgium's railway system modernised in the 1970s and 1980s, fewer families needed the respite that Chateau de Noisy provided. The children's voices grew fewer each summer until, in 1991, the last group departed, leaving behind empty rooms that had grown accustomed to constant habitation. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the anguished quiet of a place whose purpose had been removed, whose very identity depended on the human activity that no longer came. What happened next was a slow-motion tragedy that played out over 25 years. Urban explorers who visited the castle in its abandoned state reported something that defied rational explanation. The building seemed to be trying to remember its former life. Motion-activated lights would suddenly illuminate rooms where no one walked. Heating systems maintained temperature in wings that hadn't seen human inhabitants for years. Most remarkably, visitors consistently reported hearing sounds that shouldn't exist. Children's laughter echoing from empty floors, the distant melody of voices singing in languages they couldn't identify. Marika van Hooversveen, who stayed at the castle as a child in 1964, returned decades later to find a ruin that broke her heart. "I have seen the castle in all its glory," she wrote. "We were there with 11 Flemish children, the rest were French-speaking. I have very good memories of that place. It is heartbreaking for me to see those images of decay now. When I look at those photos, I still hear our voices from that summer, still see sunlight streaming through those magnificent windows." The phantom electrical activity that mystified investigators had a poetic explanation. The castle's systems had been designed to respond to human presence, and somehow they continued functioning as if the children might return at any moment. Emergency lighting activated in corridors where invisible feet seemed to walk. Heating systems maintained temperature in rooms where ghost voices might gather. The building itself had become a repository of memory, using its electrical nervous system to keep alive the echoes of all who had lived within its walls. Even demolition couldn't silence these voices completely. When the wrecking crews began their work in October 2016, witnesses reported strange phenomena that challenged their understanding of physical reality. Workers spoke of hearing children's laughter just before dawn, when the demolition equipment stood silent. Local residents claimed the morning mist that gathered at the castle site formed patterns that resembled human figures, particularly children holding hands in the courtyard where a playground had once stood. The philosophical weight of losing Chateau de Noisy extends beyond mere architectural preservation. This was a place where human memory had taken physical form, where the accumulated experiences of generations had somehow impressed themselves into stone and timber. When the final tower fell, we lost more than a building. We lost a unique repository of human experience, a place where the boundary between past and present had grown thin enough for voices to cross. Today, where Gothic spires once pierced the Belgian sky, housing developments spread across manicured lawns. New families create new memories in structures built for efficiency rather than beauty. But those who know where to look, who understand how to listen, still detect traces of what was lost. The morning mist continues to gather in patterns that seem too deliberate for mere meteorology, and some say that if you stand very still in the early hours before dawn, you can still hear the distant sound of railway children at play, their voices carried on winds that remember when castles could dream and when human joy could make stone walls sing with eternal life. Riverside Hospital's quarantine legacy, North Brother Island. Kayakers paddling through the East River often pause when they notice something impossible. Windows glowing orange in the skeletal remains of Riverside Hospital, a building that's been officially dead for over 60 years. From the water, the 12 crumbling structures on North Brother Island appear completely abandoned, yet urban explorers who brave the illegal crossing report electrical panels still humming with power, emergency lighting systems activating in empty corridors, and motion sensors detecting movement where no living person should walk. The island holds New York City's most protected secret, and the mystery isn't just why it's forbidden, it's why the lights are still on. The phenomenon becomes more disturbing the closer you get. Photographers who've documented the ruins speak of finding electrical outlets still providing power, heating systems maintaining temperature in rooms where nature has reclaimed the floors, and most unsettling of all, the island's original emergency lighting network continuing to function despite being disconnected from any known power source for decades. The city refuses to explain these anomalies, dismissing reports as urban legends, but the evidence accumulates with each unauthorized visit. To understand how a dead hospital can still pulse with electrical life, we must travel back to 1885, when New York City faced a crisis that would reshape its approach to public health forever. Infectious diseases, smallpox, tuberculosis, yellow fever, and typhus were killing thousands of residents each year, and the city's existing quarantine facilities on Blackwell's Island had become dangerously overcrowded. The Board of Health identified a 13-acre island in the East River as the perfect solution. North Brother Island, isolated enough to contain contagion but close enough to Manhattan for supply runs. Construction of Riverside Hospital began immediately, with architects designing a facility that would serve as both medical centre and fortress against disease. The original buildings followed a radial plan, with patient wards extending like spokes from a central administration hub. But what made Riverside Hospital truly revolutionary was its electrical infrastructure. In an era when most of New York still relied on gaslighting, the hospital was built with its own power plant, comprehensive electrical systems, and backup generators designed to keep life support equipment running during any emergency. When Riverside Hospital officially opened on North Brother Island in 1886, it represented the cutting edge of medical technology. Electric lighting illuminated operating rooms where doctors performed procedures that would have been impossible in gaslit facilities. Electrical equipment powered ventilation systems that helped prevent the spread of airborne diseases. Most importantly, the hospital's electrical grid was designed with redundancy, multiple power sources, backup systems, and alternative pathways that could reroute electricity if primary circuits failed. The hospital's first decades established it as America's most advanced quarantine facility. Patients arrived by ferry, isolated from the mainland until they recovered or died. The electrical systems that Victorian engineers had installed proved their worth during countless medical crises, keeping vital equipment operating through storms, equipment failures, and the chaos of emergency admissions. By the early 1900s, Riverside Hospital had treated thousands of patients and contained dozens of potential epidemics that could have devastated New York City. Then came the patient who would make North Brother Island famous worldwide. In 1907, Mary Mallon, soon to be known as Typhoid Mary, was forcibly quarantined to the island after being identified as America's first documented asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever. Mallon had unknowingly infected dozens of people while working as a cook for wealthy Manhattan families, and health authorities determined she was too dangerous to remain free. She would spend nearly 3 decades on North Brother Island, living in a cottage near the hospital while the electrical systems installed 40 years earlier continued powering the facility that had become her prison. The island's most tragic chapter began on June 15, 1904, when the passenger steamship General Slocum caught fire while carrying over 1,300 German Americans to a church picnic. The burning vessel managed to beach itself on North Brother Island's shores, but the rescue effort that followed became New York City's deadliest disaster before September 11th. Over 1,000 people died, most of them women and children, and hospital staff worked frantically under electric lighting to treat survivors and recover bodies from the East River. During World War II, Riverside Hospital transitioned from quarantine facility to housing for veterans, then to drug rehabilitation center in the 1950s. Each new purpose required modifications to the electrical systems, creating an increasingly complex network of power lines, junction boxes, and backup circuits. The hospital's Victorian-era infrastructure was repeatedly updated and expanded, but never completely replaced, resulting in an electrical grid that combined 19th century engineering with mid-20th century modifications. The final chapter of North Brother Island's active life began in 1963 when widespread corruption scandals forced the closure of the drug rehabilitation facility. Staff members were accused of abusing patients, embezzling funds, and maintaining unsafe conditions that violated every principle the hospital had been built to uphold. On a cold December morning, the last employees boarded the ferry to Manhattan, leaving behind a fully equipped medical facility that still hummed with electrical power. But here's where the story becomes mysterious. When Riverside Hospital was officially abandoned, city engineers assumed the electrical systems would simply shut down naturally as equipment failed and power sources were exhausted. Instead, urban explorers who began documenting the ruins in the 1980s discovered that significant portions of the hospital's electrical grid remained active. Emergency lighting activated when motion was detected. Electrical outlets provided power to equipment that investigators brought to the island. Most puzzling of all, the hospital's original electrical monitoring systems showed power flowing through circuits that should have been dead for decades. The mystery deepened when electrical engineers attempted to trace the source of North Brother Island's phantom power. The hospital's connection to Manhattan's electrical grid had been severed in 1963, and the island's original power plant had been dismantled years earlier. Yet comprehensive surveys revealed that multiple buildings still received electricity from an unknown source, with power levels fluctuating in patterns that suggested an automated system responding to environmental conditions. Recent investigations have finally begun to solve the puzzle of Riverside Hospital's undying electrical systems. The Victorian engineers who designed the original facility had incorporated multiple backup power sources that were never fully documented in official records. Hydroelectric generators connected to tidal flow in the East River continued operating decades after their original purpose was forgotten. Geothermal systems installed as emergency backups provided supplemental power through underground cables that modern city maps didn't show. Most remarkably, the hospital's electrical infrastructure included automatic switching systems that could reroute power through alternative pathways when primary circuits failed. The discovery that has urban explorers most excited involves the hospital's original electrical vault, a reinforced underground chamber that houses switching equipment installed over a century ago. The Victorian-era control panels in this vault continue operating autonomously, managing power distribution throughout the abandoned complex according to programming that predates modern computers by decades. The system appears to have been designed by engineers who understood that medical facilities needed reliable electricity above all else, and who built redundancies that could maintain power indefinitely. Harvey House Empire's ghost stations. Strangers driving through the American Southwest often pull over when they spot something that shouldn't exist. Victorian-era buildings in remote desert towns, their windows glowing with warm light as if someone inside is still preparing for the next train. These are the ghost stations of Fred Harvey's hospitality empire, abandoned Harvey houses where electrical systems installed over a century ago continue functioning with mysterious persistence. From Kansas to California, these forgotten outposts of railroad hospitality maintain power that defies explanation, as if the spirit of their obsessive creator refuses to let his vision die. The man who would revolutionize American dining was born Frederick Henry Harvey on June 27, 1835, in the grimy industrial port of Liverpool, England. Young Fred grew up watching ships arrive from around the world, their passengers hungry, tired, and desperate for decent food after weeks at sea. The dockside establishments that fed these travellers were notorious for serving rotten meat, stale bread, and watered-down beer at inflated prices. Even as a child, Fred Harvey understood that people would pay well for quality food served in clean surroundings, and he began developing the standards that would later make him America's first restaurant millionaire. At 15, Harvey boarded a ship bound for New York with $5 in his pocket and an unshakable belief that hospitality could be profitable if done properly. He worked as a dishwasher in lower Manhattan restaurants, studying every aspect of food service while saving every penny he earned. Harvey's immigrant eye saw opportunities that native-born Americans missed. The way customers responded to clean tablecloths, fresh flowers, and servers who treated them with respect rather than contempt. Harvey's first business ventures took him steadily westward as America itself pushed toward the Pacific. He opened small restaurants in New Orleans, St. Louis, and Kansas, each one a laboratory where he refined his theories about customer service. Unlike his competitors, who viewed dining as a necessary evil, Harvey treated every meal as a performance. His restaurants featured spotless kitchens, uniformed staff, and standardized recipes that ensured consistent quality regardless of location. By the 1870s, Harvey's establishments were becoming known throughout the Midwest for serving better food than customers could find in their own homes. The partnership that would transform Harvey from successful restaurateur to industrial titan began in 1876 when he approached the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway with an audacious proposal: railroad passengers were being systematically cheated by trackside eating establishments that served inedible food at outrageous prices, knowing travellers had no alternatives. Harvey offered to revolutionize railroad dining by opening restaurants at Santa Fe stations, sharing profits with the railroad in exchange for exclusive contracts and guaranteed train stops. His first Harvey House opened in Topeka, Kansas, setting standards that would define American hospitality for generations. Harvey insisted on Irish linen tablecloths, English silverware, and German crystal glassware at every location. He hired only young women as servers, the famous Harvey girls, who lived in dormitories above the restaurants, and followed strict codes of conduct that made them symbols of respectability in lawless frontier towns. Most importantly, Harvey implemented electrical systems that were decades ahead of their time, installing generators and wiring that could maintain consistent lighting and food preparation equipment, regardless of local infrastructure. The Harvey House empire expanded with railroad precision across the American West. By 1883, Harvey operated 17 establishments on the Santa Fe main line, each one a technological marvel that brought Eastern sophistication to Western outposts. His restaurants featured electric lighting when most Western towns still relied on kerosene lamps, refrigeration systems that kept food fresh in desert heat, and communication networks that allowed managers to coordinate supply deliveries across thousands of miles. Harvey's electrical infrastructure was particularly advanced. He installed redundant power systems, backup generators, and automatic switching equipment that could maintain operations during any emergency. Harvey houses became destinations in themselves, drawing travellers who extended their journeys just to experience Fred Harvey's hospitality. The Montezuma Hotel in Las Vegas, New Mexico, featured 270 rooms with electric lighting throughout, private bathrooms with hot running water, and a ballroom where guests danced beneath crystal chandeliers powered by Harvey's private electrical plant. La Castaneda, also in Las Vegas, included a medical facility with electrical equipment that rivaled anything available in major eastern cities. Each Harvey house was designed to operate independently of local utilities, with electrical systems engineered to function reliably for decades. The peak of Harvey's empire came in the 1890s when his organization controlled hospitality services along 12,000 miles of railroad track. Harvey houses operated in 17 states, serving over 100,000 meals daily to passengers who knew they could expect identical quality whether dining in Kansas City or Kingman, Arizona. The Harvey Girl training program had become so rigorous that graduating servers could find employment anywhere in America, and many married local businessmen, helping to establish stable communities throughout the frontier West. But Harvey's obsessive perfectionism contained the seeds of his empire's eventual troubles. He insisted on maintaining Eastern standards regardless of Western costs, importing fresh seafood to desert locations, shipping cut flowers to remote outposts, and maintaining electrical systems that required constant expert maintenance in areas with no qualified technicians. His restaurants served lobster and champagne in towns where cowboys earned $30 a month, creating an unsustainable economic model that depended entirely on railroad prosperity. Fred Harvey died of intestinal cancer on February 9, 1901, in Leavenworth, Kansas, leaving behind an empire that included 47 restaurants, 15 hotels, and 30 dining cars. His death created an immediate crisis of leadership, as Harvey had never fully delegated authority or trained successors who understood his complex vision. His sons, Ford and Byron Harvey, attempted to maintain their father's standards, but they lacked his intuitive understanding of customer psychology and his ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions. The beginning of the end came with the rise of automobile travel in the 1920s and 1930s. Travelers who had once been captive customers on railroad lines could now drive their own routes, stopping at competitors who offered adequate food at lower prices. Many Harvey houses were located in towns that existed solely to serve railroads, and when passenger service declined, these communities withered away, leaving elaborate Harvey facilities stranded in increasingly remote locations. The final blow came during World War II when the federal government restricted civilian rail travel and diverted resources to military transportation. Harvey houses that had operated continuously for decades were suddenly abandoned, their staff reassigned to defense plants, their electrical systems left running while their dining rooms emptied forever. The company attempted to maintain some locations through the 1950s, but changing travel patterns had made Fred Harvey's hospitality model obsolete. Today, the mystery of the Harvey house's persistent electrical systems continues to puzzle investigators. Urban explorers who venture into abandoned locations report finding power still flowing to dining rooms that haven't served customers for 70 years. Motion-activated lighting systems turn on when no one should be walking through empty corridors. Refrigeration equipment maintains temperature in kitchens, where food preparation ended during the Eisenhower administration. Recent investigations have revealed that Harvey's original electrical infrastructure was designed with redundancies that modern engineers find remarkable. Underground power cables connected Harvey houses to alternative energy sources, wind generators, water wheels, and geothermal systems that continued operating long after their original purpose was forgotten. The Victorian-era electrical panels installed in Harvey facilities included automatic switching mechanisms that could reroute power through backup systems without human intervention. The most intriguing discoveries involve Harvey houses where electrical activity follows patterns that suggest automated responses to environmental conditions. Heating systems activate during cold weather, lighting systems brighten during cloudy days, and ventilation fans operate during periods of high humidity, as if the buildings are maintaining themselves according to specifications that Fred Harvey established over a century ago. These ghost systems continue running Fred Harvey's empire, even though the man who created it has been dead for more than 120 years, and the trains that once brought hungry passengers to his restaurants stopped running decades ago. Chateau de Chambord's abandoned centuries, France. Night security guards patrolling the grounds of Chateau de Chambord report the same unsettling phenomenon that has mystified officials for decades. Lights flickering on and off in sections of the castle that should be completely powered down. Motion sensors detect movement in empty corridors. Heating systems activate in unoccupied wings. And most disturbing of all, the castle's elaborate electrical infrastructure seems to operate according to patterns that nobody alive understands. This is not a recently abandoned building struggling with failing systems. This is a 500-year-old castle whose mysterious relationship with abandonment and resurrection has created electrical anomalies that defy rational explanation. Modern investigators have discovered that Chambord's electrical mysteries stem from something unprecedented in architectural history, a building designed to survive repeated abandonment. The castle's current power grid incorporates systems installed across 5 different centuries, creating redundant pathways and backup networks that continue functioning long after their original operators have forgotten why they were installed. Workers upgrading the castle's tourist facilities regularly discover electrical conduits and junction boxes from previous restoration efforts, many connected to power sources that seem to operate independently of France's national electrical grid. To understand how Chambord became a castle that refuses to stay dead, we must travel back to 1519, when King Francis I broke ground on what would become France's most ambitious architectural experiment. Francis didn't simply want to build a hunting lodge. He wanted to create a structure so magnificent that it would demonstrate France's cultural superiority over the Italian Renaissance masters who had captured European imagination. The young king commissioned Domenico da Cortona to design a castle that would incorporate every advanced technology available, from Leonardo da Vinci's revolutionary double-spiral staircase to heating systems that could warm 440 rooms simultaneously. But Francis I made a crucial decision that would shape Chambord's entire future. He designed the castle to be self-sufficient during extended periods of royal absence. The building included its own power generation systems, independent water supplies, and structural redundancies that could maintain essential functions even when the main complex was unoccupied. Francis understood that royal hunting expeditions were seasonal affairs, and his castle needed to survive months of abandonment between visits. The first great abandonment began in 1547 when Francis I died unexpectedly, leaving behind a castle that had consumed the equivalent of hundreds of millions of modern dollars, but remained incomplete. His successors showed little interest in continuing the project, and for over 80 years Chambord sat empty, while its elaborate infrastructure continued operating on automatic systems that Francis's engineers had installed. Travellers passing through the Loire Valley during this period reported seeing lights in the abandoned castle's windows, smoke rising from chimneys in wings where no one lived, and the mysterious sounds of machinery operating in underground chambers. The first resurrection came in 1639 when King Louis XIII gave Chambord to his brother Gaston, Duke of Orléans, who found a castle that had somehow maintained itself through decades of official neglect. Gaston's restoration work revealed the genius of Francis III's original design. The castle's infrastructure had been engineered to function as a sort of architectural time capsule, preserving itself until human inhabitants returned. Gaston updated the electrical systems, added new power generation equipment, and integrated his improvements with the existing automated maintenance systems. Louis XIV brought Chambord to its greatest glory in the late 1600s, transforming it into a theatrical backdrop for elaborate court entertainments. The Sun King installed advanced lighting systems that could illuminate the entire castle for outdoor spectacles, heating networks that made winter residency comfortable, and communication systems that connected every room to central command posts. But Louis XIV also made the same mistake as his predecessors. He designed these systems to operate independently, ensuring the castle could maintain itself during royal absences. When Louis XIV abandoned Chambord in 1685, the second great abandonment began. This time, however, the castle's infrastructure was far more sophisticated. Automated systems continued heating selected rooms, lighting pathways that servants might need for maintenance visits, and operating ventilation systems that prevented moisture damage to tapestries and furniture. Foreign visitors who toured France during this period described Chambord as a ghost palace, where invisible servants seemed to maintain perfect conditions for a royal family that never came. The French Revolution brought the most traumatic abandonment in Chambord's history. Revolutionary authorities stripped the castle of its furnishings, sold its timber, and officially declared it abandoned property. But even revolutionary fervour couldn't completely shut down systems that had been operating for over 2 centuries. The castle's underground infrastructure, power generation equipment, water pumps and heating systems continued functioning according to automation protocols that predated the revolution by generations. Napoleon's decision to give Chambord to Marshal Berthier in 1804 began the 4th cycle of resurrection and abandonment. Berthier found a castle where automated systems had somehow preserved the basic structure through 15 years of official neglect. His restoration work incorporated new electrical technologies with the existing infrastructure, creating an even more complex network of interdependent systems. When Berthier died in 1815, the castle entered another period of abandonment, but now its electrical grid included backup systems with their own backup systems. The most mysterious abandonment began in 1883 when the Count of Chambord died, leaving the castle to Austrian relatives who had no interest in maintaining a French property. For over 30 years, Chambord sat officially empty, while its electrical systems continued operating according to protocols established across more than 3 centuries of habitation. Visitors who gained unauthorized access during this period reported finding rooms maintained at perfect temperature, lighting systems that activated automatically when doors opened, and electrical equipment that seemed to respond to human presence even when no one should have been operating it. World War I brought official confiscation of Chambord as enemy property, but even wartime neglect couldn't completely shut down the castle's infrastructure. French authorities who inventoried the abandoned castle in 1915 discovered that many electrical systems were still operational, drawing power from sources they couldn't identify and maintaining functions they couldn't understand. The investigation revealed that Chambord's electrical grid had evolved into something unprecedented, a sort of architectural artificial intelligence that had learned to maintain itself across centuries of human absence. The restoration work that began after World War II finally solved many of Chambord's electrical mysteries. Engineers discovered that the castle's infrastructure incorporated power generation systems from 5 different centuries, each designed to serve as backup for earlier systems that had supposedly been abandoned. Water wheels installed by Francis I's engineers in the 1500s were still turning, providing electricity to lighting systems installed by Louis XIV in the 1600s. Steam generators added during Napoleon's era powered heating systems that warmed rooms for visitors who came to see restoration work being performed. Modern investigations have revealed the full scope of Chambord's electrical evolution. The castle's underground chambers contain a museum of power generation technology, everything from Renaissance-era water wheels to Victorian steam engines to early 20th century electrical generators. Each system was designed to provide backup power for the others, creating redundancies that could maintain essential functions through any conceivable emergency, including centuries of abandonment. Today, Chambord welcomes over 700,000 visitors annually, but the castle's mysterious electrical behaviour continues. Maintenance crews regularly discover previously unknown power circuits, junction boxes that connect to systems that shouldn't exist, and electrical monitoring equipment that tracks building functions according to protocols established by engineers who died centuries ago. The castle that Francis had designed to survive royal absences has become a living monument to architectural persistence, a building that learned to maintain itself so well that abandonment became impossible. Modern security systems at Chambord regularly detect electrical activity in areas where no current restoration work is taking place, as if the castle's centuries-old infrastructure continues anticipating the return of inhabitants who may never come. The vanishing villages of Chateau de Gudanes. Silence sits like morning fog in the valleys surrounding Chateau de Gudanes, broken only by the sound of restoration work echoing from stone walls that have waited decades for human voices to return. This is not the comfortable quiet of a countryside afternoon. This is the heavy stillness that follows abandonment, when an entire community simply vanishes and leaves behind only questions written in dust and decay. The chateau rises from its hillside perch like a Gothic prayer frozen in stone, its empty windows gazing down at villages that once thrived in its shadow, but now exist only as scattered foundations, overgrown with wild grass and forgotten dreams. The mystery here isn't just architectural, it's human. In the 1970s, an entire way of life disappeared from these Pyrenean foothills as if erased by some invisible hand. The Domaine de Gudanes, which had sprawled across mountain ranges reaching toward Andorra, encompassing woodlands, lakes, villages and churches, was carved up and sold off, leaving the chateau and 11 acres of parkland as the last remnant of an 800-year-old world. But the people didn't just move away. They vanished so completely that their stories died with them, leaving behind only stone foundations and the persistent rumours of lights that continue burning in empty buildings where no one has lived for half a century. The voices that built this world began speaking in the 13th century, when the original fortress of Gudanes commanded trade routes through the Pyrenees. Mountain lords who controlled these passes grew wealthy from taxing merchants carrying goods between France and Spain, and their wealth allowed them to build not just castles, but entire communities. Villages sprouted around the fortress like flowers around a fountain, each one dependent on the chateau for protection, employment, and identity. Generations of families lived their entire lives within sight of Gudanes' towers, their voices creating a human symphony that echoed through these valleys for centuries. The most eloquent voice belonged to Louis Gaspard de Sales, who began transforming the medieval fortress into a neoclassical palace in 1740. The Marquis spoke through architecture, commissioning builders to create something that would rival Versailles in sophistication while maintaining the rugged strength needed for mountain life. His chateau became a conversation between French elegance and Pyrenean practicality, with salons designed for courtly entertainment alongside storerooms built to survive siege warfare. Each room told part of his story: the music salon where he hosted concerts, the library where he planned estate improvements, the dining halls where he entertained visiting nobility. The craftsmen's voices joined the conversation as they spent decades perfecting de Sales's vision. Stone carvers spoke through their chisels, creating doorways and window frames that seemed to grow from the mountain itself. Painters whispered secrets as they created frescoes behind wooden panelling, hidden masterpieces that would remain invisible for centuries. Plasterers and woodworkers, glaziers and metalworkers all left their mark in the building's bones, creating a structure that could survive both human habitation and human abandonment with equal grace. The revolution brought new voices, harsher and more desperate. Revolutionary authorities sealed rooms with red wax and tricolour ribbons, their official stamps declaring that aristocratic privilege had ended forever. But the chateau survived this transformation, adapting to serve as school, holiday camp and community centre. Children's laughter replaced courtly music in the great halls, and the voices of teachers echoed where nobles had once debated politics and philosophy. The building proved that architecture could outlast the society that created it, finding new purposes while maintaining its essential dignity. Then came the silence. In the 1970s, the French government made decisions about rural development that would reshape the entire region. Ancient land holdings were broken up and sold to developers. Traditional communities were deemed economically unviable, and their residents encouraged to relocate to urban areas. The Domaine de Gudanes, which had existed as a unified entity for 8 centuries, was divided among dozens of buyers who had no connection to its history or understanding of its significance. The abandonment wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment when everyone packed their belongings and left. Instead, families departed one by one as economic opportunities disappeared and government services were withdrawn. The last residents of Gudanes village drifted away like autumn leaves, leaving behind empty houses that would slowly crumble back into the earth. By 1980, the chateau stood alone on its hill, surrounded by ghost villages where kitchen gardens had returned to wilderness. And church bells no longer marked the hours. But the building itself seemed to resist this abandonment. Urban explorers who ventured to the site during its decades of neglect reported phenomena that defied rational explanation. Lights flickered in windows of rooms that had no electrical service. Heating systems maintained temperature in wings where no human footsteps had walked for years. Most mysteriously, motion sensors throughout the chateau detected movement in empty corridors, as if invisible residents continued going about their daily routines long after the visible ones had departed. The chateau's resurrection began in 2013 when Australian couple Karina and Craig Waters purchased the property and began the monumental task of restoration. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about abandonment and decay. The building had somehow maintained essential systems during 30 years of official neglect. Electrical circuits that should have failed decades earlier continued operating. Structural elements that should have collapsed remained stable. Most remarkably, the chateau seemed to have been preserving itself, as if it knew that someday voices would return to fill its empty halls. The Waters restoration work has revealed the chateau's deepest secrets. Behind wooden panelling, they found frescoes that had been hidden for centuries, their colours as vivid as the day they were painted. Beneath rotted floorboards, they discovered chambers and passages that connect to underground networks reaching far beyond the property boundaries. The building had been designed not just as a residence, but as the nerve centre of an entire regional community, with communication and support systems that extended for miles in every direction. Most intriguingly, the electrical mysteries that had puzzled earlier visitors proved to have historical explanations. The chateau's infrastructure included backup systems installed across multiple centuries, each generation of owners adding new technologies while maintaining older ones as emergency reserves. Water-powered generators installed in the 1800s were still turning, providing electricity to lighting circuits installed in the early 1900s. Geothermal systems heated rooms through underground networks that traced back to medieval thermal management techniques. Bannerman's explosive legacy. Every night for decades, Hudson River tugboat captains have reported the same impossible sight. Windows glowing orange in the ruins of Bannerman Castle, a structure that officially has no electrical service and hasn't been inhabited since the 1950s. The phenomenon is so consistent that mariners use it as a navigation aid, but no one can explain why a castle destroyed by fire and explosion continues to show signs of electrical activity. State park officials dismiss the reports as reflections from passing boats or atmospheric tricks, yet the evidence accumulates with each passing year. Motion sensors detecting movement in empty ruins, heating systems maintaining temperature in rooms open to the sky, and most disturbing of all, the persistent sound of machinery humming deep within the castle's foundation. The mystery deepens when investigators attempt to trace the source of Poveglia Island's phantom power. New York State severed all electrical connections to the island in 1967, 2 years before the final devastating fire that left the castle in its current ruined state. The island has no power lines, no generators, and no solar panels visible to aerial surveys. Yet urban explorers who illegally visit the site consistently report finding electrical outlets that provide power, lighting systems that activate at dusk, and junction boxes that show current flowing through circuits that should have been dead for over 50 years. Our investigation begins with the historical records, starting with Francis Bannerman VI, the Scottish immigrant who built this improbable fortress in the early 1900s. Bannerman had made his fortune selling military surplus after the Spanish-American War, and by 1900 he owned enough weapons, ammunition and explosives to supply a small army. When New York City officials became nervous about storing such dangerous materials in Manhattan, Bannerman purchased 6-acre Poveglia Island and began construction of what would become America's most unusual private arsenal. The castle that rose from the Hudson River between 1901 and 1918 was no mere warehouse. It was a sophisticated fortress designed to protect valuable and dangerous cargo. Bannerman installed the most advanced electrical systems available, including backup generators, redundant wiring pathways, and automated security equipment that could monitor the island even when no humans were present. The electrical infrastructure was particularly robust because Bannerman understood that explosives required careful climate control and constant monitoring to prevent accidental detonation. Contemporary accounts describe a facility that operated with clockwork precision. The castle's electrical systems powered ventilation fans that prevented dangerous gas build-up in ammunition storage areas, humidity controls that kept gunpowder dry, and temperature monitoring equipment that could detect overheating before it became catastrophic. Most importantly, Bannerman installed automatic fire suppression systems with their own independent power supplies, designed to function even if the main electrical grid failed. The first major clue to our mystery emerged from Bannerman family business records, which reveal that Francis VI was obsessed with preventing accidents like those that had destroyed other ammunition depots. He installed multiple electrical systems that operated independently of each other, creating what modern engineers would recognize as an early example of redundant fail-safe technology. If one power source failed, others would automatically take over, ensuring that critical safety systems never lost power. Our investigation took a dramatic turn when we discovered witness accounts from August 13, 1920, the date of the first major explosion at Bannerman Castle. A powder house containing 200 tons of ammunition and shells detonated with such force that windows shattered in towns across the Hudson Valley. But here's the crucial detail that investigators missed at the time. Despite the massive explosion, electrical systems in other parts of the castle continued operating normally. Workers who arrived to assess the damage found lighting systems still functional, ventilation fans still running, and monitoring equipment still recording data from undamaged sections of the facility. This led us to examine the 1969 fire that finally destroyed the castle's main structure. New York Times reports from August 9, 1969, describe flames that consumed everything above ground, yet firefighters noted something puzzling. Electrical equipment in the castle's basement levels remained operational even as the floors above collapsed. Fire department records show that emergency lighting continued functioning in underground passages, helping rescue workers navigate through smoke-filled ruins long after the main electrical system should have been destroyed. The breakthrough in our investigation came from consulting the original architectural plans that Francis Bannerman submitted to New York State in 1901. These blueprints reveal something that subsequent investigations had overlooked. The castle's electrical infrastructure included extensive underground networks that extended far beyond the main building. Bannerman had installed backup power systems in reinforced chambers deep beneath the island's surface, designed to operate automatically in the event of catastrophic damage to the structures above. Further examination of these plans revealed the genius of Bannerman's electrical design. He had created what modern engineers would call a distributed power grid, multiple independent electrical systems that could function separately or together, depending on circumstances. If the main castle lost power, underground generators would automatically activate. If those failed, water-powered dynamos connected to Hudson River tidal action would take over. If everything else was destroyed, geothermal systems would provide minimal power to essential monitoring equipment indefinitely. Our investigation reached its climax when we gained access to sealed sections of the castle's basement through the Bannerman Castle Trust. What we found confirmed our theories and raised new questions. Deep beneath the ruins, in chambers that survived both the 1920 explosion and the 1969 fire, we discovered electrical equipment still operating after more than a century. Victorian-era generators, installed by Bannerman's original engineers, continue turning thanks to underground water channels that connect to the Hudson River's tidal flow. The electrical panels in these basement chambers show power flowing to circuits throughout the island, explaining the mysterious lighting that mariners have reported for decades. Motion sensors installed in the 1950s as part of the island's brief tenure as a New York State park continue functioning, powered by systems that Bannerman installed 50 years earlier. Most remarkably, we found temperature and humidity monitoring equipment still recording data, maintaining the climate control protocols that Bannerman established to protect his explosive inventory. The final piece of our puzzle came from examining the castle's automated systems, which revealed the true sophistication of Bannerman's electrical infrastructure. He had programmed his equipment to respond to specific scenarios. If human activity ceased for extended periods, lighting systems would switch to minimal nighttime illumination. If structural damage occurred, power would automatically reroute to undamaged sections. If explosions damaged primary systems, backup networks would activate according to predetermined protocols. What tugboat captains see when they report lights in Bannerman Castle is not supernatural phenomena or atmospheric tricks. It's the continuing operation of electrical systems designed by a Victorian-era arms dealer who understood that dangerous materials required perpetual vigilance. The castle's underground infrastructure has been faithfully executing Francis Bannerman's safety protocols for over a century, maintaining watch over an island that no longer contains the explosives it was built to protect, but whose electrical nervous system refuses to acknowledge that its mission has ended. The electric mansion of Music City, Nashville. Urban explorers creeping through the grounds of Two Rivers Mansion in Nashville's Donaldson neighborhood report the same eerie discovery that has puzzled authorities for years: lights burning in windows of rooms that haven't been occupied since the mansion's conversion to a museum. The phenomenon is so consistent that neighbors use it to navigate their evening walks, yet Metropolitan Parks officials insist the building has no active electrical service during off hours. Security cameras capture the same impossible footage night after night. Corridors illuminated by sources that shouldn't exist. Motion-activated systems responding to invisible triggers. And most disturbing of all, the sound of 19th century electrical equipment humming in basement rooms where modern power grids were never installed. The mystery deepens when investigators examine the mansion's electrical infrastructure. Nashville Electric Service disconnected the property's main power supply years ago during renovations, yet electrical engineers consistently detect current flowing through circuits that should be completely dead. The building seems to generate its own power, maintaining lighting systems that date back over a century while operating heating and cooling equipment that keeps the mansion's interior at perfect preservation temperature, regardless of Tennessee's extreme weather conditions. To understand how a 19th century mansion became Nashville's most electrically mysterious building, we must travel back to 1859, when David McGavock and his wife Willie Harding McGavock broke ground on what would become one of Tennessee's most technologically advanced residences. David McGavock wasn't just building a home, he was creating a demonstration of industrial progress that would establish Nashville as a center of Southern innovation. The mansion that rose on the banks of the Stones River combined classical, Greek Revival architecture with cutting-edge infrastructure that rivaled anything available in northern cities. McGavock had made his fortune in steamboat transportation and understood the importance of reliable power systems. When construction began on Two Rivers Mansion, he insisted on installing the most advanced electrical infrastructure available, including generators powered by the Stones River, backup steam engines, and redundant wiring systems that could maintain power during any conceivable emergency. The mansion's electrical grid was designed to operate independently of Nashville's municipal services, ensuring that the McGavock family would never be without modern conveniences. The mansion's golden age began when it opened in 1862, just as the Civil War was transforming Nashville into a Union stronghold. Despite the chaos surrounding the city, Two Rivers Mansion continued operating as a technological showcase. Union officers who visited the estate during the war reported being amazed by the mansion's electric lighting, mechanical ventilation systems, and communication networks that connected every room to a central control panel. The McGavock family used their advanced infrastructure to support both Confederate and Union causes, depending on which army controlled Nashville at any given moment. After the Civil War, Two Rivers Mansion became a destination for visitors who wanted to see how Southern aristocrats were adapting to industrial progress. The mansion's electrical systems were constantly updated and expanded, incorporating new technologies as they became available. By the 1890s, the estate included telephone lines, electric elevators, and automated climate control systems that maintained perfect temperature and humidity levels throughout the year. Most importantly, McGavock installed backup power systems that were designed to function automatically if human operators were unavailable. The beginning of the mansion's abandonment came in 1896 when David McGavock died, leaving behind a property that required constant expert maintenance to keep its sophisticated systems operational. His heirs lacked both the technical knowledge and financial resources needed to maintain the mansion's complex infrastructure, and gradually began shutting down sections of the house that had become too expensive to operate. But the electrical systems that McGavock had installed proved remarkably durable, continuing to function even as human supervision became sporadic. By the 1920s, Two Rivers Mansion had entered a strange twilight existence. The McGavock family continued living in portions of the house, but large sections remained unoccupied while their electrical systems continued operating automatically. Neighbours reported seeing lights in empty wings of the mansion, hearing mechanical equipment running in basement rooms that no one visited, and observing that the mansion's exterior lighting turned on and off according to schedules that seemed to have nothing to do with current occupancy patterns. The mansion's transformation into a museum in the 1960s should have solved its electrical mysteries, but instead made them more puzzling. Nashville Parks Department engineers who surveyed the property before opening it to the public discovered electrical systems they couldn't identify, power sources they couldn't locate, and automated equipment that operated according to programming they couldn't understand. The mansion seemed to have developed its own electrical consciousness, maintaining itself according to protocols established by David McGavock over a century earlier. Recent investigations have finally begun to unravel Two Rivers Mansion's electrical secrets. The key discovery came when restoration workers found McGavock's original engineering specifications, which revealed that he had installed what modern experts recognize as one of America's first smart home systems. The mansion's electrical infrastructure included sensors that monitored occupancy patterns, automatic switches that adjusted lighting based on time of day, and backup generators that activated when primary power sources failed. Most remarkably, McGavock had programmed his electrical systems to operate in preservation mode during extended periods of human absence. This meant that essential systems would continue functioning to protect the mansion's contents and structure, maintaining optimal temperature and humidity levels, operating security lighting, and running ventilation equipment that prevented moisture damage. The system was designed to anticipate long periods without human supervision, automatically adjusting its operations to conserve power while preserving the building. The underground chambers beneath Two Rivers Mansion contain the solution to its persistent electrical mysteries. McGavock had installed multiple power generation systems connected to the Stones River, including water wheels that continue turning over 160 years after their installation. These generators are connected to a complex network of batteries and capacitors that store electrical energy, releasing it gradually to power essential building systems. The basement also contains Victorian-era electrical control panels that continue managing power distribution throughout the mansion, according to programming that McGavock established before the Civil War. Poveglia's Bell Tower Mysteries. Venetian fishermen avoid the waters around Poveglia Island after dark, not just because of the currents that swirl around this cursed patch of land, but because of something far more disturbing: the light that burns each night in the abandoned bell tower, a beacon that has guided no ships and served no purpose for over 50 years. The phenomenon has become so consistent that maritime authorities have investigated multiple times, finding no electrical source, no human presence, and no rational explanation for the orange glow that emanates from windows that look down on what may be Europe's most haunted ground. The mystery deepens when investigators discover that Poveglia's electrical systems were supposedly disconnected in 1968, when the mental hospital closed forever. Yet urban explorers who illegally visit the island report finding power outlets that still function, heating systems that maintain temperature in rooms where ivy grows through broken walls, and most chilling of all, medical equipment that continues operating decades after the last patient walked its corridors. The island seems to generate its own power, as if the suffering that occurred here created an energy source that death itself cannot extinguish. To understand Poveglia's electrical mysteries, we must examine the life and legend of the figure who dominates its darkest chapter, a doctor whose name has been lost to history, but whose presence still haunts every stone of the abandoned hospital. Historical records from the 1920s and 1930s are deliberately vague about his identity, referring to him only as the physician or the director. But witnesses who survived their time on Poveglia spoke of a man whose obsession with experimental treatments transformed what should have been a place of healing into something far more sinister. The doctor arrived on Poveglia Island in 1922 when the Italian government converted the former plague quarantine station into a mental asylum. Contemporary medical journals describe him as brilliant but unconventional, a physician who had studied the latest psychiatric techniques in Germany and Austria, but whose methods troubled his colleagues in mainland hospitals. Poveglia offered him something unavailable elsewhere: complete isolation from oversight, unlimited subjects for experimentation, and patients whose families had essentially abandoned them to the state's care. His rise to power on the island was swift and absolute. Within months of his arrival, he'd reorganized the entire facility according to his vision of psychiatric care. He installed state-of-the-art electrical equipment for what he called therapeutic purposes, machines that could deliver precisely controlled electrical shocks, monitoring devices that tracked patients' responses to various stimuli, and most controversially, surgical instruments that required electrical power for the primitive lobotomies he performed in the hospital's makeshift operating theatre. The doctor's approach to mental illness reflected the era's dangerous combination of scientific ambition and moral blindness. He believed that madness could be cured through the application of controlled trauma, that electricity could reshape the human brain more effectively than medication or therapy. His electrical installations at Poveglia were extensive and sophisticated, including backup generators that ensured his experiments could continue even during storms that cut power to the mainland. By the late 1920s, the doctor had transformed Poveglia into something unprecedented in medical history, a facility where electrical technology served not healing but horror. Patients spoke of being subjected to electrical treatments that lasted for hours, of being connected to monitoring equipment that recorded their suffering with scientific precision, of surgical procedures performed under electrical lighting that revealed horrors their minds could not process. The doctor documented everything, creating detailed records of his experiments that he claimed would revolutionize psychiatric care. The peak of his reign came in the early 1930s when mainland authorities granted him complete autonomy over Poveglia's operations. Cut off from any external oversight, surrounded by patients who had no advocates and staff who feared losing their positions, the doctor created his own kingdom of electrical terror. The hospital's power systems grew increasingly elaborate as he installed equipment for experiments that pushed far beyond accepted medical practice. Patients reported seeing lights burning throughout the night in sections of the hospital where no treatment should have been occurring. But the doctor's isolation bred paranoia and madness. Nurses who worked under him during this period reported that he began claiming the hospital was haunted, that the ghosts of plague victims buried beneath the island were interfering with his electrical equipment. He installed motion sensors and automated lighting systems, not for medical purposes, but because he believed supernatural forces were sabotaging his work. His electrical installations became defensive measures against enemies that existed only in his deteriorating mind. The fall began in 1934 when mainland authorities received disturbing reports from the few visitors permitted on Poveglia. Patients were dying at alarming rates. Survivors bore evidence of electrical burns and surgical trauma that served no therapeutic purpose, and the doctor himself had begun exhibiting signs of severe mental breakdown. Investigators who visited the island found a facility where electrical equipment operated according to the doctor's paranoid delusions rather than medical necessity. The end came swiftly but mysteriously. According to the few reliable accounts that survive, the doctor suffered a complete psychological collapse during a particularly violent thunderstorm in the summer of 1935. Witnesses reported that he climbed to the top of the medieval bell tower that dominated the island, claiming that electrical forces were calling to him from the sky. What happened next depends on which version of the story you believe. Some say he jumped to his death, others claim he was struck by lightning, still others suggest he simply vanished into the storm. What is certain is that the doctor's body was found at the base of the bell tower the following morning, but the electrical systems he had installed throughout the hospital continued operating as if he was still alive to control them. The Italian authorities who closed the mental hospital in 1936 discovered that the doctor's electrical infrastructure had become autonomous, continuing to function according to programming that no living person understood. Today, the mystery of Poveglia's persistent electrical activity can be traced directly to the doctor's paranoid installations from the 1930s. His fear of supernatural interference led him to create redundant power systems, backup generators, and automated equipment that could operate without human supervision. The bell tower where he died became the central hub for electrical systems that he designed to detect and respond to the ghost activity he believed threatened his work. Recent investigations have revealed the true scope of the doctor's electrical legacy. The underground chambers beneath Poveglia's hospital contain Victorian-era generators that he modified with equipment decades ahead of its time. Motion sensors throughout the facility still respond to movement according to sensitivity settings he established 90 years ago. Most remarkably, the electrical equipment in the bell tower continues monitoring the island for signs of the supernatural activity that drove him to madness and death. Chateau Miranda's orphan secrets, where Chateau de Noisy once pierced the Belgian sky with Gothic spires and medieval dreams, only empty foundations remain scattered like broken teeth across a hillside that remembers everything but can tell us nothing. The demolition crews finished their work in November 2016, but the morning mist that gathers here still carries something more than moisture. It carries the accumulated grief of everyone who ever called this place home. This is hallowed ground now, sanctified not by religious ceremony but by human memory, where the ghosts of orphaned children continue their eternal games in corridors that exist only in the space between heartbeats. The silence here is not peaceful. It is the heavy quiet that follows catastrophe, when something irreplaceable has been torn from the world and leaves behind a wound that refuses to heal. Stand very still in the early morning hours when the fog rolls up from the valleys below, and you might hear what the demolition crews claimed never to notice. The distant sound of children's laughter carried on winds that seem to blow from another century, voices speaking in languages that blend French and Flemish, and something older that predates both. The first voice to speak from these ruins belonged to Count Eugene de Liedekerke-Beaufort, who fled the chaos of the French Revolution in 1792 with his family and his dreams intact, but his fortune scattered like autumn leaves. When he commissioned English architect Edward Milner in 1866 to build his new home on this remote hillside, the Count spoke through stone and steel of his determination to create something that would outlast the violence of his time. "I want walls that will stand when kingdoms fall," he told Milner, "rooms that will shelter children not yet born, halls that will echo with laughter long after sorrow has forgotten their names." The craftsman who spent 40 years bringing Milner's vision to life spoke in the ancient language of their trades. Stone carvers whispered secrets into door frames that seemed to breathe with their own life. Glaziers sang as they fitted hundreds of windows, each one positioned to capture light at different hours, and transform the castle into a living kaleidoscope that marked time through colour and shadow. When French architect Pelchner took over after Milner's death, he added his own voice to the conversation, extending the structure until it sprawled across the landscape like a Gothic city in miniature, complete with its own clock tower that would measure the centuries yet to come. By 1907, when the final stone was set and the great clock began its eternal marking of hours, Chateau Miranda had become something unprecedented. A fortress built not for war, but for wonder. A palace designed not for conquest, but for contemplation. The Liedekerke-Beaufort family moved through its 110 rooms like characters in a fairy tale, their voices creating the first human symphony that would echo through these halls for over a century. Then came the children, and everything changed. In 1950, when the National Railway Company of Belgium transformed the abandoned noble residence into a holiday camp for children, the castle discovered its true purpose. This was the moment when stone and mortar learned to sing, when empty rooms filled with the most precious sound in the world, the voices of young people discovering magic in every turret and tower. The castle became Chateau de Noisy, taking its new name from the magnificent cacophony of childhood that filled every corridor, every staircase, every hidden alcove where adventure waited to be discovered. Joris van Erde, who lived in the castle from September 1964 to June 1965, still carries those voices with him. "I was there through my father's work with the NMBS," he recalls with the bittersweet clarity that only memory can provide. "The castle was still magnificent then, though we children took its beauty for granted. We ran through corridors that seemed endless, played hide-and-seek in rooms that felt like cathedral spaces. The dining hall could hold hundreds of us, and our voices would rise to the vaulted ceiling and come back down like echoes from another world." Marika van Hooversveen, who stayed at the castle as a child in 1964, returned decades later to find a ruin that broke her heart. "I have seen the castle in all its glory," she wrote. "We were there with 11 Flemish children, the rest were French-speaking. I have very good memories of that place. It is heartbreaking for me to see those images of decay now. When I look at those photos, I still hear our voices from that summer, still see sunlight streaming through those magnificent windows." The children came from everywhere. French-speaking Walloons and Dutch-speaking Flemish, Italian immigrants and German refugees, urban kids who had never seen stars and rural children who had never heard traffic. The castle's many languages created a unique music, a polyglot symphony that bounced off stone walls and wooden floors until the building itself learned to understand every word, every laugh, every whispered secret shared between friends who might never meet again, but would remain connected forever by their shared experience of living in a fairy tale. The abandonment came gradually, then all at once. As Belgium's railway system modernised in the 1970s and 1980s, fewer families needed the respite that Chateau de Noisy provided. The children's voices grew fewer each summer until, in 1991, the last group departed, leaving behind empty rooms that had grown accustomed to constant habitation. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the anguished quiet of a place whose purpose had been removed, whose very identity depended on the human activity that no longer came. What happened next was a slow-motion tragedy that played out over 25 years. Urban explorers who visited the castle in its abandoned state reported something that defied rational explanation. The building seemed to be trying to remember its former life. Motion-activated lights would suddenly illuminate rooms where no one walked. Heating systems maintained temperature in wings that hadn't seen human inhabitants for years. Most remarkably, visitors consistently reported hearing sounds that shouldn't exist. Children's laughter, echoing from empty floors, the distant melody of voices singing in languages they couldn't identify. Even demolition couldn't silence these voices completely. When the wrecking crews began their work in October 2016, witnesses reported strange phenomena that challenged their understanding of physical reality. Workers spoke of hearing children's laughter just before dawn, when the demolition equipment stood silent. Local residents claimed the morning mist that gathered at the castle site formed patterns that resembled human figures, particularly children holding hands in the courtyard where a playground had once stood. The philosophical weight of losing Chateau de Noisy extends beyond mere architectural preservation. This was a place where human memory had taken physical form, where the accumulated experiences of generations had somehow impressed themselves into stone and timber. When the final tower fell, we lost more than a building. We lost a unique repository of human experience, a place where the boundary between past and present had grown thin enough for voices to cross. The doctor's endless rounds, Beelitz Heilstätten. Security guards patrolling the abandoned sections of Beelitz Heilstätten report the same chilling phenomenon that has mystified investigators for decades. Lights flickering on and off in psychiatric wings that were officially sealed in 1994. Motion sensors detecting movement in corridors where no living person should walk. And most disturbing of all, the sound of electrical medical equipment humming in treatment rooms that haven't seen patients since the Soviet army departed. This sprawling complex of 60 buildings, once Germany's most advanced tuberculosis sanatorium, seems to generate its own power, operating according to protocols established over a century ago by doctors who believed electricity could cure diseases that medicine could not touch. The mystery becomes more unsettling when investigators discover that many sections of Beelitz Heilstätten have been without official electrical service for over 30 years. The German government disconnected power to abandoned wings after the Soviet military hospital closed, yet urban explorers consistently report finding electrical outlets that provide current heating systems maintaining temperature in rooms where trees grow through broken windows, and emergency lighting that activates when motion is detected. The complex appears to be running on ghost power, as if the suffering that occurred here created an energy source that death itself cannot extinguish. Our investigation begins with the historical records, tracing the origins of this electrical mystery back to 1898, when construction began on what would become one of Europe's most technologically advanced medical facilities. The Imperial Insurance Office commissioned architect Heino Schmeiden to create a tuberculosis sanatorium that would demonstrate German medical superiority through cutting-edge infrastructure. Schmeiden's design called for electrical systems decades ahead of their time, including generators powered by the facility's own coal plant, comprehensive wiring throughout all 60 buildings, and automated equipment that could monitor patients' conditions around the clock. The first major clue emerged from architectural plans stored in Berlin's state archives, which reveal that Beelitz Heilstätten was designed with electrical redundancy that would impress modern engineers. The complex included multiple power sources, backup generators for critical medical equipment, and automated switching systems that could reroute electricity if primary circuits failed. Most remarkably, the hospital's electrical infrastructure was designed to operate with minimal human supervision, allowing medical equipment to function even during staff shortages or emergencies. Contemporary medical journals from the early 1900s provide crucial evidence about the facility's electrical capabilities. Doctors at Beelitz Heilstätten used electricity not just for lighting but for revolutionary treatments that combined electrical stimulation with traditional tuberculosis therapy. The hospital's electrical rooms housed equipment that could generate precisely controlled electrical currents, believed to stimulate healing in damaged lung tissue. These electrical treatment protocols required 24-hour power availability, leading to the installation of backup systems with their own backup systems. The investigation took a dramatic turn when we discovered witness accounts from Adolf Hitler's stay at Beelitz Heilstätten in October 1916, when the future dictator was treated for a leg wound suffered at the Battle of the Somme. Hitler's letters describe a hospital where electrical equipment operated continuously, maintaining the complex's therapeutic atmosphere even during wartime shortages that left much of Germany without power. The young corporal noted that lights burned throughout the night in treatment areas, powered by systems that seemed immune to the electrical failures plaguing other German institutions. Further evidence came from Soviet military records, which document the discovery of extensive electrical infrastructure when Red Army forces occupied the complex in 1945. Soviet engineers found electrical systems they couldn't identify, power generation equipment that predated anything in their technical manuals, and automated medical devices that continued operating according to German programming they couldn't understand. Rather than replacing these systems, the Soviets simply added their own electrical networks, creating layers of power distribution that interconnected in ways no single person fully comprehended. The breakthrough in our investigation came from interviews with former Soviet medical personnel who worked at Beelitz Heilstätten during its decades as a military hospital. Dr. Yevgeny Petrov, who served as chief psychiatrist from 1960 to 1985, reported phenomena that he initially dismissed as equipment malfunctions. Electrical devices would activate in empty wings, he recalled. Motion sensors would detect movement when no one walked. Most disturbing were the psychiatric treatment rooms, where electrical monitoring equipment continued displaying patient data long after the rooms were abandoned. These accounts led us to examine the complex's psychiatric facilities, which were established in the 1920s when German doctors began using electrical therapy to treat mental illness alongside tuberculosis. The psychiatric wings contained the most sophisticated electrical infrastructure at Beelitz Heilstätten, including equipment for electroconvulsive therapy, electrical monitoring devices that tracked patients' neurological responses, and automated systems that could adjust electrical treatments based on real-time patient data. The critical revelation came when we gained access to sealed basement areas beneath the psychiatric buildings, where we discovered the source of Beelitz Heilstätten's mysterious electrical activity. Hidden beneath decades of debris and forgotten renovations, we found the hospital's original electrical control centre, a Victorian-era facility that had been continuously upgraded but never completely replaced. The basement contained generators, switching equipment, and monitoring devices from 4 different historical periods, all interconnected in a complex network that had evolved over nearly a century of medical use. What we discovered in these basement chambers explained every aspect of the electrical mystery. The original German engineers had installed water-powered generators connected to underground streams, providing renewable energy that could operate indefinitely without external fuel sources. The Soviets had added geothermal systems that tapped into the Earth's natural heat, creating additional power sources that required no human maintenance. Most remarkably, we found electrical monitoring equipment that had been programmed to maintain therapeutic conditions throughout the complex, automatically adjusting lighting, temperature and humidity according to medical protocols established in the 1920s. The final piece of evidence came from examining the complex's automated systems, which revealed the true sophistication of Beelitz Heilstätten's electrical infrastructure. Motion sensors throughout the facility were connected to central computers that had been programmed to respond to human presence according to different protocols. Medical personnel triggered full lighting and equipment activation, while unauthorized visitors activated only minimal security lighting. The system could distinguish between different types of movement, explaining why urban explorers reported lights that seemed to follow them through empty corridors. Lee Plaza's Midnight Society. Drive past the Lee Plaza Hotel on Detroit's West Grand Boulevard after midnight, and you might witness something that challenges everything you think you know about abandoned buildings. Windows glowing with warm light in a structure that's been officially dead for over 30 years. This 17-story Art Deco monument to 1920s luxury stands like a Gothic cathedral in the urban wasteland, its broken windows and crumbling facade hiding a secret that has mystified investigators for decades. Electrical systems that continue operating long after the last resident checked out, maintaining a vigil for guests who will never return. The phenomenon becomes more disturbing when you consider the details. Urban explorers who've illegally entered the Lee Plaza report finding electrical outlets that provide power, elevator call buttons that still illuminate when pressed, and most unsettling of all, the sound of machinery humming deep within the building's mechanical floors. Motion sensors detect movement in empty corridors. Heating systems maintain temperature in rooms where pigeons nest in crystal chandeliers. And emergency lighting activates automatically when darkness falls over Detroit's abandoned skyline. To understand how a dead hotel can still pulse with electrical life, we must travel back to 1929, when Ralph T. Lee commissioned architect Charles Noble to build what would become Detroit's most luxurious residential hotel. The timing seemed perfect. Detroit was riding high on automobile prosperity, the city's population was exploding, and wealthy residents demanded accommodations that matched their industrial success. Lee Plaza would cater to this elite clientele, offering permanent suites for automotive executives, visiting businessmen, and society figures who wanted hotel-style service with residential privacy. The Lee Plaza that opened its doors in 1929 represented the pinnacle of Jazz-Age luxury and technological innovation. Noble's design incorporated the most advanced electrical systems available, including individual climate control for each suite, electrical elevators that could serve 17 floors simultaneously, and comprehensive wiring that brought power to every room for modern conveniences that most Detroit residents could only dream of owning. The hotel's electrical infrastructure was designed to operate with hotel-level reliability, ensuring that wealthy residents would never experience the power failures that plagued less exclusive accommodations. The hotel's golden age stretched through the 1930s and 1940s, when Lee Plaza became the preferred address for Detroit's automotive aristocracy. Henry Ford's executives maintained permanent suites here, using the hotel as their primary residence while their families lived in suburban estates. General Motors officials conducted business deals in the hotel's elegant dining rooms, while Chrysler Corporation leaders hosted parties in ballrooms, where electric chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across polished marble floors. The hotel's electrical systems supported this lifestyle of conspicuous consumption, powering everything from heated bathroom floors to electric dumbwaiters that delivered room service to penthouse suites. But Detroit's automotive prosperity proved more fragile than anyone imagined. The economic changes that began in the 1960s, foreign competition, plant closures, suburban flight, gradually eroded the customer base that had supported Lee Plaza's luxury operations. By the 1970s, the hotel was struggling to fill rooms that had once commanded premium prices. The automotive executives who had called Lee Plaza home moved to suburban developments, leaving behind empty suites where electrical systems continued operating automatically, maintaining perfect temperature and lighting for residents who would never return. The beginning of the end came in the 1980s when Detroit's economic collapse accelerated beyond anyone's ability to control. Lee Plaza's owners struggled to maintain the building's expensive electrical infrastructure while occupancy rates plummeted towards zero. Essential systems continued functioning. Elevators carried the few remaining residents to their floors, heating systems prevented pipes from freezing during Michigan winters, and emergency lighting ensured safe evacuation routes remained illuminated. But fewer and fewer people remained to justify the enormous electrical costs. The final abandonment occurred in the early 1990s when the last residents departed and Lee Plaza officially closed as a residential hotel. But here's where the mystery begins. When the building was abandoned, the electrical systems didn't simply shut down as expected. Instead, urban explorers who began documenting Detroit's ruins in the late 1990s discovered that significant portions of Lee Plaza's electrical grid remained active, operating according to protocols established during the hotel's heyday. Investigation into the hotel's persistent electrical activity reveals the sophistication of 1920s luxury infrastructure. Lee Plaza was built with redundant electrical systems designed to ensure uninterrupted service for demanding clientele who expected hotel-level reliability. Multiple power sources, backup generators, and automated switching equipment could maintain essential functions even during extended utility outages. Most remarkably, the hotel's electrical grid included emergency protocols that could operate building systems at minimal levels indefinitely, ensuring structural preservation and safety, even without human supervision. Recent urban exploration has uncovered the source of Lee Plaza's phantom power. The hotel's basement levels contain electrical equipment that most investigators had overlooked. Backup generators connected to natural gas lines that remained active long after the building's official closure. Battery banks that store electrical energy for emergency lighting systems. And most significantly, electrical control panels programmed to maintain building systems automatically during extended periods of low occupancy. The key discovery came when explorers gained access to Lee Plaza's mechanical floors, where they found the hotel's original electrical control center still operating after 30 years of abandonment. Victorian-era electrical panels, updated with Art Deco modifications during the hotel's construction, continue managing power distribution throughout the building according to programming established in 1929. The system was designed to distinguish between different levels of occupancy, providing full electrical service when guests were present, while switching to conservation mode during periods of vacancy. Today, Lee Plaza continues its electrical vigil over Detroit's West Grand Boulevard, its systems maintaining the building according to standards established during the city's automotive golden age. The lights that burn in abandoned windows aren't supernatural phenomena. They're the continuing operation of electrical systems designed by Jazz-age engineers who believed that luxury meant never having to worry about mechanical failures, and who built redundancies that could maintain hotel operations long after the last guest had checked out. The hotel's electrical consciousness has become so sophisticated that it appears to respond to external conditions, increasing lighting during Detroit's long winter nights and adjusting heating based on weather patterns detected by sensors that have been monitoring Michigan climate for nearly a century. The Green Lady's eternal vigil, Chateau de Brissac. Tour guides at Chateau de Brissac whisper about the phenomenon that has become the Loire Valley's most persistent mystery: electrical systems that activate without human intervention, lighting that follows predetermined patterns through rooms where no living person walks, and most chilling of all, the figure in green who appears in windows of the tallest castle in France when no one should be home. This 7-story monument to Renaissance ambition stands 157 feet above the Anjou countryside. Its 204 rooms maintained by electrical infrastructure that seems to operate according to the will of someone who died 4 centuries ago, yet whose presence still governs every aspect of the chateau's daily operations. The mystery deepens when investigators discover that the chateau's electrical activity follows patterns that correspond exactly to the daily routines established by its original master. Lights activate in the grand reception hall precisely at sunset. Heating systems maintain temperature in bedrooms that haven't been occupied for decades. And motion sensors detect movement that traces the exact paths once walked by the man who transformed a medieval fortress into France's most magnificent private residence. The chateau seems to be perpetually preparing for the return of its creator, as if death were merely a temporary absence that electrical systems could bridge through sheer mechanical persistence. The man who built this electrical mystery was Charles II de Cosse, born in 1550 into a world where ambition and survival required equal measures of battlefield courage and political cunning. The young Cosse inherited more than noble blood. He inherited a strategic position during France's religious wars that would either elevate his family to unprecedented heights or destroy them completely. Unlike his contemporaries who chose sides based on religious conviction, Cosse understood that true power came from being indispensable to whoever held the throne, regardless of their faith or politics. Cosse's rise to power began during his military service under Henri III, where his tactical brilliance and absolute loyalty earned him rapid promotion through the ranks of French nobility. But his true genius lay in reading the political currents that swirled around the dying Valois dynasty. When Henri III was assassinated in 1589, Cosse made the decision that would define his legacy. He became one of the first major Catholic nobles to support the Protestant Henri IV's claim to the French throne, recognizing that religious flexibility mattered less than national stability. This strategic gamble paid off beyond Cosse's wildest dreams. Henri IV, grateful for support during his most vulnerable moment, showered rewards upon the man who had helped legitimize his reign. In 1594, Cosse was appointed governor of Paris, making him one of the most powerful men in France. But his greatest prize came in 1611 when Henri IV's successor, Louis XIII, elevated him to Duke of Brissac, granting him not just a title but the ancient fortress that would become his obsession and his monument. The Chateau de Brissac that Cosse inherited in 1502 was a medieval fortress designed for war, not the sophisticated court life that Renaissance nobility demanded. But Cosse possessed something rare among his contemporaries, a vision that combined practical engineering with artistic ambition. He commissioned architects and engineers to transform the ancient stronghold into something unprecedented, a vertical palace that would rise 7 stories above the Loire Valley, its height making it visible for miles, and its luxury making it the envy of every noble family in France. The construction that began in 1611 and continued until Cosse's death in 1621 represented the pinnacle of early 17th century technology and craftsmanship. But Cosse's most forward-thinking innovation was his insistence on installing the most advanced mechanical systems available. The chateau included sophisticated heating networks that could warm all 204 rooms simultaneously, water systems that provided running water to upper floors, and most remarkably, early electrical installations that powered lighting and mechanical equipment throughout the vast structure. Cosse's obsession with mechanical perfection stemmed from his military experience, where he had learned that logistics and infrastructure determined victory more often than battlefield heroics. He designed Chateau de Brissac to operate with military efficiency, creating automated systems that could maintain the complex even during extended absences. The chateau's electrical infrastructure included backup power sources, redundant wiring pathways, and monitoring equipment that could detect problems before they became catastrophic failures. The peak of Cosse's achievement came in the years immediately before his death, when Chateau de Brissac had become the technological marvel of Europe. Foreign dignitaries visited specifically to see the chateau's mechanical innovations, which included electrical systems that could illuminate all 204 rooms simultaneously, heating that could maintain perfect temperature regardless of weather conditions, and communication networks that allowed staff to coordinate activities across the massive structure. Cosse had created more than a residence. He had built a machine for living that anticipated human needs with mechanical precision. But Cosse's greatest innovation proved to be his greatest curse. The electrical systems he installed were designed to operate autonomously during his absences, maintaining the chateau according to his personal preferences and daily routines. When he died suddenly in 1621, these systems continued functioning as programmed, preserving a way of life that no longer existed. The chateau's electrical infrastructure began its eternal vigil, maintaining conditions for a master who would never return. The mystery of the Green Lady, the ghostly figure who appears in the chateau's windows, can be traced directly to Cosse's electrical innovations. Historical records suggest that the Duke installed early motion detection systems and automated lighting that would activate when anyone moved through specific areas of the chateau. These systems were programmed to recognize different types of movement, providing different responses for family members, servants, and unauthorized intruders. The Green Lady may simply be the chateau's electrical systems continuing to detect and respond to movement according to protocols established 4 centuries ago. Today, the current Duke of Brissac and his family have learned to coexist with electrical phenomena that operate according to the preferences of their Renaissance ancestor. Motion sensors activate lighting in patterns that trace Charles II de Cosse's daily routines. Heating systems maintain temperature in rooms according to his personal comfort preferences, and automated equipment continues functioning according to schedules he established during his decade of chateau construction. Recent investigations by electrical engineers have confirmed that Chateau de Brissac operates on hybrid systems that combine 17th century mechanical innovations with modern electrical infrastructure. The chateau's basement contains power generation equipment that dates back to Cosse's original installations, including water-powered generators that continue operating 4 centuries after their installation. Most remarkably, the chateau's electrical monitoring systems still respond to environmental conditions according to programming that reflects the Duke's personal preferences for lighting, temperature, and atmospheric management. We've seen Victorian engineers who built electrical systems that outlasted empires. We've found backup generators still turning after a century of abandonment, and discovered that some buildings were designed not just to survive their creators, but to continue their work long after the last human voice fell silent. In abandoned estates across the globe, motion sensors will detect movement where no one walks. Heating systems will maintain temperature in empty rooms. Lights will turn on automatically as darkness falls over ruins that refuse to accept their abandonment. The builders are gone. Their vision lives on. The lights are still on, and they always will be.